Wizard of Oz is a staple in children's fantasy, often discussed as an example of a modern-day fairy tale, despite not being old enough or having originated in oral tradition. So it's kind of like how we talk about things like Alice in Wonderland or Peter Pan, or even things as recent as Narnia or The Lord of the Rings. The first book in the series was published in 1900, and the last one came out in 1963, so there is a lot to read. That's not even counting things like comics, crossovers, anything specifically based off the 1939 film, and things like Wicked, which is essentially published fan fiction. Given that there are 40 books total, often called the Fabulous 40, you'd be surprised that L Frank Baum, the original author, only really wrote 14 of those books. And when I expressed an interest in wanting to read the rest of the Wizard of Oz books, not knowing how many there actually were, I was definitely shocked to receive this 15-book box set for Christmas last year. I really only ever asked for books, so I was pretty happy. There are 5 books in this box set, but each of those books is divided into 3. So I was able to read all 14 of the original stories, plus the 15th written by Ruth Plummy Thompson, who wrote a couple of them after L Frank Baum's passing. Anyway, I think they're pretty easy to get through, in my opinion, but if you're not into continuity issues or retcons, then I do not suggest that you embark on this journey, and maybe just sit back and let me yap about it for a little bit. Hi, I'm Gabby, and I am an illustrator, and usually what I use this channel for is to post my sketchbook tours and other art-related videos, so you're probably confused as to why I am basically making a video essay about a book series that came out in the 1900s. And the reason for that is that I am a nerd. I'm a nerd. And after I finished the entire box set, I kind of went down a rabbit hole of Oz-related content. I read Wicked, I watched a bunch of adaptations, I followed the Oz vlog on TikTok, and I even got to see The Wiz on Broadway last month when I went on a work trip, so that was really fun. And overall, I've been really hesitating making this video because, like I said, it is essentially a video essay, and that's not really what I do. I really like to post art, even if it's not necessarily professional. And so I figured that a good way for me to justify making this video was to essentially share a bunch of designs of some of the characters that aren't really well known, or maybe just some scenes that I really like, just so that I can justify in my head talking about this to my camera in my bedroom for, I want to say, a good few days. Mainly because there's no power in my house. The power keeps coming on and off. I am from Puerto Rico, so I feel like I don't need to explain that.
Ricky, when I catch you, Ricky.
I didn't really grow up reading The Wizard of Oz, but I did grow up reading a lot of children's fantasy, and so even though I watched The Wizard of Oz movie pretty much every year for Christmas, I never really got to read the book until I got a copy of my own, I want to say in like early high school, late middle school, around there, and I was obsessed with it, but for some reason I never read any of the other books, and so this was really fun for me. I do have critiques, I do have some thoughts, and I can't wait to share them with you guys. So hopefully you stick around. I am probably going to talk about what happens in every single book, so if you haven't read any of them, obviously there's going to be spoilers, but personally for me, I love to sit back and watch videos where people talk about books that I have never read or have any intention of reading. So hopefully you enjoy that also, and we can have fun here. So like I said earlier, I went through all 15 of these books, and while I would like to sit back and talk about what happens in each book, chapter by chapter, and what every single character looks like, that would set me back, I think, like 10 hours. And so instead, I am nothing if not a scholar, and I have prepared a synopsis for each single one of these books, and I'm gonna go through them with you guys, and hopefully we'll have fun, because I intend to chatter away. I really do. I'm gonna have to self-edit myself a lot. This bow makes me look like the fairy godmother from Cinderella, but I think it's really cute because it's what was left over of the ribbon that I used when I made my Regency dress for my birthday, because I'm officially 27 years old. I have no money and no prospects. I'm already a burden to my parents, and I'm frightened. I'm also filming this on the ground. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is the first book in the series, and I think it's the story that most of us are pretty familiar with because it inspired the general plotline of the 1939 film. The movie has definitely surpassed the book itself in terms of our general cultural consciousness, because most pop culture references to the Wizard of Oz usually include a Dorothy that definitely resembles Judy Garland, references to the musical numbers, and of course the use of red slippers instead of Dorothy's silver shoes. But to recap, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is a story of a little girl named Dorothy Gale who lives with her aunt and uncle on a Kansas farm. And one day, her and her dog Toto get magically transported to the Land of Oz via a tornado, and her house just lands right on top of the Wicked Witch of the East. So unlike the movie, it is not Glinda who comes to greet Dorothy, and it is instead the Good Witch of the North. And Glinda has kind of become a composite character of sorts because most adaptations or parodies of the Wizard of Oz kind of combine her and the Good Witch of the North together, mainly because the Good Witch of the North does not really make any other appearances outside of this book and one specific cameo in a different book, and she doesn't really have much to do. Glinda, on the other hand, is a character that shows up, now that I'm thinking about it, I think in every single other book that I read, at least, even if it's just like a brief cameo. Glinda's pretty important. And a lot of the times they are turned into sisters if they are not merged into one single person in order to parallel the Wicked Witches, but that's also not true. They don't really have that kind of relationship. The Good Witch of the North is just not as powerful either, and so she can't really help Dorothy, nor does she know where Kansas is. Put a pin in that, we're gonna get to that. Anyway, she essentially tells Dorothy that she has to follow the yellow brick road, go to the Emerald City, and speak to the wizard. And she also gives her the Wicked Witch's shoes and gives her a little kiss on the forehead, which is actually really cute because it's essentially a protection spell, and it protects her from harm. She can still get hurt, I think. It's not really elaborated on much. However, it kind of does what these shoes do in the movie, if that makes sense. So this is where things get world buildy. This is where things get a little tricky geography-wise, because what is set up in this first book is definitely what we continue to read about in the other ones, except the expansion of it gets really tricky and really weird. So pay attention. I will definitely have a map here, and I will change it as we go because there will be changes. But in the first book, Oz itself is not really like another world. It's kind of like another dimension that is attached to our world. The only way to get in there is to sort of like stumble your way in somehow, but the people of Oz don't know about us, and we don't know about the people of Oz. And so Oz itself is split into 4 different quadrants. And those 4 quadrants all sort of surround the Emerald City, which is in the middle. And each of those 4 quadrants is color coordinated. Munchkin Land is blue. And when I say blue, I mean blue. The houses are blue, everyone wears blue, the grass is blue. There's also the Quadling country, which is red. There's the Gillikin country, which is purple. And there's the Winky country, which is yellow. And then obviously Emerald City is in the middle, and that is all green. Put a pin in that. We will get back to that. Now, the reason why regular human beings cannot interact with the people of Oz and why the people of Oz can interact with us is that around the quadrants that I just mentioned is a thing called the Deadly Desert. The Deadly Desert surrounds Oz on all sides, and the only way over it is to fly, because if you touch the sands of the Deadly Desert, you will perish. You will cease to exist. Fun. Okay, so the fact that Dorothy makes it over and doesn't get hurt and lands directly in Munchkin Land is kind of like a miracle, which would explain why everyone was kind of like amazed at the fact that she descended from the heavens and her house kills the Wicked Witch of the East. So on the way to the Emerald City, as most of you guys know, she meets up with the Scarecrow who wants a brain, the Tin Man that wants a heart, and the Cowardly Lion that wants courage. And not much is different in the books, except we do get a lot of added backstory specifically for the Tin Man. His name is Nick Chopper. He used to be a regular Munchkin man, and then he got cursed by the Wicked Witch of the East so that every time he used his axe, a limb would get chopped off and he would have to replace it with a sort of tin prosthetic for it, and that's why he ends up being the way that he is. It wasn't like a regular Beauty and the Beast transformation where bam, he's made out of tin. No, it was a slow, possibly painful process. We'll get more to that later. Then all 4 of them plus Toto, after a series of little mini adventures that I'm not going to get too into because we got a lot to cover, they make it to the Emerald City. And when they get there, they are given green spectacles so that they can handle the brilliance of the Emerald City, because everything is allegedly made out of emeralds. We're going to talk about that later for continuity. But I think most people that, I don't know, like the musical Wicked probably know where this is going. They make it to the Emerald City and they all get told that they will get to meet the wizard, but individually. They can't go in together. And the wizard appears differently to each person. And I do think this part is pretty cool. So to the Scarecrow, the wizard appears as kind of like this beautiful, elegant woman. To the Cowardly Lion, and I think this is really effed up, he shows up as kind of this very biblical ball of fire. Why would you do that to him? And to the Tin Man, he shows up as this really big, scary, furry, multi-legged, multi-eyed monster. And then to Dorothy, he appears as kind of like that floating head that I think most of us are really familiar with. So after meeting with Dorothy, the wizard agrees to help them, but only if they go on another little quest to kill the Wicked Witch of the West. And this is where things get very different than the movie for many reasons, but mostly the Wicked Witch doesn't look like this. The Wicked Witch isn't even green. You've been lied to. You have been lied to. If you've only ever watched the movie or literally any of the countless references to the movie or read Wicked or seen the musical, you would think that her being green is like a key point of her character. No, not only is she not green, she kind of just looks like a regular person, you know, like witchy, but she also has an eye patch, and that eye patch covers up a telescopic eyeball. So like, you can say whatever you want about Muppets Wizard of Oz. Is it the best Muppet movie? Absolutely not. Is it the best Wizard of Oz adaptation? Absolutely not. But it is the first time I've ever seen them do the Wicked Witch of the West with just an eye patch. So slay Miss Piggy, as always. You never disappoint me. So using her telescopic eyeball, the witch sees them coming and decides to send obstacles their way. First, she sends a pack of wolves, and the Tin Woodman chops them up with his axe. She also sends a pack of crows, and the Scarecrow snaps their freaking necks. Then she sends a swarm of bees, and they kind of just like attack the Tin Man and die because they can't pierce through tin, and they just, you know, they killed themselves, as bees tend to do. And then she sends her army of Winky soldiers, and they're so scared by the lion that they don't do anything and they come back. And so she has nothing else to do except to send the winged monkeys. Now, the winged monkeys, I fear, get a negative reputation because most people did not like them in the movie. I think most people, whether they're our age or like our parents, if you talk about the winged monkeys, they cringe. They get really scared. They have a very negative reaction. They hate those things. So the monkeys are essentially enslaved by the witch because she has a thing called the golden cap, which kind of works as like a genie trap. They have to do 3 things for her, at least 3 things within their power to do. And then after that, whoever else holds the golden cap can use it to make them do whatever they want, so on and so forth. And the Wicked Witch of the West didn't even really bind them to that cap. That was a different sorceress named Gaylette. Because they ruined her wedding. There's a backstory there, whatever. She's the one that did it, and she never shows up again. So that's such a waste of the name Gaylette, isn't it? So the monkeys capture Dorothy, Toto, and the lion, and they just kind of jack up the Tin Man and the Scarecrow, and they take Dorothy to the Wicked Witch. The Wicked Witch makes Dorothy her servant girl and tries to take her shoes. And Dorothy is so upset by this that she takes the bucket of water that she had and splashes it over the Wicked Witch, and the Wicked Witch is dead. For now? Question mark. The Wicked Witch dies, and the Winkies, so the people of the Winky country, the yellow country, are so elated by this. They're so happy, and they ask the Tin Man, who they have met now. I kind of skipped over some stuff for this. They asked him if he would like to rule over them instead, because he's just so kind-hearted, and after the Wicked Witch, they need, you know, gentle, loving care. And he's like, yeah, sure, I'll do that, but only after I can get Dorothy back home. And so now Dorothy takes the golden cap, and she calls the monkeys, and she tells them to take all of them back to the Emerald City. And they do, but once they get there, the monkeys are like, hey, listen, you only have 2 more wishes, and after that, we're out. And you kind of have to respect their work-home balance. They're like, once we're out, we're clocking out, and that's it. We're not helping you. So once they're back in the Emerald City, you know the gist. They find out that the wizard is a liar, a scammer, a charlatan, a fraud. he is not a wizard, and he's just a regular guy. He's just some guy. He, like Dorothy, flew in from the United States of America. He's from Omaha, and he was on a flying balloon, and he just lands in Oz and just lies to literally everybody about his wizardry and rules the land with 0 qualifications. Very, very much a white man thing to do, isn't it? He's been working on another weather balloon so he can get out of Dodge, and so he tells Dorothy that she and Toto can go with him and that they can try to make it back to the real world. I probably would not say yes to this, but Dorothy does because she is so desperate to get home. The wizard also decides to sort of make it up to her companions by giving them what they want, and so he gives the Scarecrow a new brain. And his new brain is not like in the movie where he has like a diploma. It's like a brain made out of like I think oats and a bunch of like pins and tacks so that they can say he's like sharp, he's smart. So it's for the pun, right? He also gives the Tin Man a silk heart, and he gives the Cowardly Lion a potion that's gonna make him brave. Essentially, he just gave all of them placebos. So even though the wizard does not actually have powers, after giving them these placebos, they kind of all just like take it as like a fact. Like they really genuinely think that he has helped them, and they continue to believe that for the rest of the book series. And I do not care what L Frank Baum says. I would never forgive this man. And I really feel sad that throughout the rest of the books, as the writing kind of changes and there's a lot of inconsistencies, I really do wish that Dorothy's friends would eventually realize that they had those qualities within them already. But for the rest of the book series, they're all really, really happy that they got these placebos, and no one ever tells them otherwise. And so they just they're kind of really happy. They seem to have gotten their happy ending, and they move on. And much like everything else that the wizard lied about, the Emerald City is not made out of pure emerald or anything like that. It's just kind of a regular city. It's the spectacles. The spectacles make everything look green, and so everyone thinks that it's made out of stunning, dazzling emeralds, but it's just like a regular city. And the day that the wizard and Dorothy and Toto are set to leave on the air balloon, they're already in the basket when Toto jumps out to go chase something, and Dorothy jumps out to go after Toto, and the balloon flies away, and they don't see the wizard. I want to say ever, but that's not true. They don't see the wizard for a while. And Dorothy is once again stuck in Oz. And she starts crying, obviously. And a soldier from the Emerald City tells her that what she should do is that she should go meet up with Glinda, the Good Witch of the South. Since the wizard is now gone, the people of the Emerald City ask the Scarecrow if he wants to rule over them, because now that the wizard has given him brains, he must be the smartest man in the world, and they really want him to rule the Emerald City. And he agrees, but only after he can help Dorothy get back home, and that's still up in the air. Dorothy decides to call on the monkeys, and she calls them and she asks them, hey, can you take me over the Deadly Desert? I need to go to Kansas. And the monkeys are like, no, we can't do that. You only have one more wish. Bye. After that, one of the guards of the Emerald City sees this, and he tells Dorothy that she should go to Glinda, the Good Witch of the South. And this would be Glinda's first appearance. In order to get to Glinda's castle in Quadling Country, they have to go through another quest and pass through this big scary forest. And what they don't know is that the forest is currently being terrorized by this big spider-like creature that none of the other animals can defeat. Except the Cowardly Lion, who now has bravery, is able to kill the spider. And all the other animals are so impressed that, like the other citizens of both Emerald City and the Winky Country, they ask the lion if, since he is the bravest creature to ever live, he would rule the forest for them. And he agrees also, but only after he can get Dorothy home. They're all super loyal to her. They love her. Once they pass the forest, they make it to this hill. And in order to get through the hill, they have to make it past these like spring-like creatures. And when I say spring, I mean like a literal like spring mechanism, not spring the season, like a spring. And anytime one of them tries to pass, the creatures will literally just smack them and they can't make it through. And so Dorothy uses the golden cap one last time to get the monkeys to get them over the hill and to Glinda. Why they couldn't get her to Glinda in the first place is unknown to me, but you know, lore. Anyway, they make it to Glinda's castle, and Glinda lives in this big red castle because it's Quadling country and everything's red. And Glinda does the thing that we all know, and that is that she tells her that she has to tap her heels together 3 times, and that will take her back to Kansas. And once she taps her feet together, it's not really like in the movie where she just kind of like wakes up from a dream. Instead, the shoes kind of make her like cyclone spin out of Oz, and the shoes fall off her feet and everything, and they go into the deadly desert, never to be seen again. They disintegrated in there, and she lands in Kansas. And that's the end of the first book. I am not going to be as specific with some of the other books unless it's really, really important. But just know that from this point on, the continuity just kind of goes all over the place because L Frank Baum had no intention of ever writing a sequel. This just kind of blew up, and he decided to take it from there. As for the illustrations, however, they were made by W.W. Denslow. And he, along with L Frank Baum, shared the copyright for The Wizard of Oz. So he definitely helped to create the general vibe and aesthetic of the world of Oz that we know today. Any and all adaptations definitely took inspiration from the work of W.W. Denslow and then just kind of took creative liberties. I, however, did not grow up with his illustrations, so I think the good thing about me choosing to make illustrations out of all these books is that I was able to picture them in my head by myself without the influence of the W.W. Denslow illustrations, and then I was able to look at them once I finished all the other books just to see what the difference was, like how I was picturing my head versus how they were originally drawn. So that was really fun. I'd also like to point out that I have drawn things from The Wizard of Oz before. This is not the first time. I drew a book cover for my portfolio based off of the first book when I reread it, I think 2 years ago. And then I did a Dorothy Gale inspired by the 1939 movie and the Rankin and Bass puppets, because every year for Christmas I do this thing where I draw a character from a movie that I associate with Christmas that has nothing to do with Christmas in order to justify why I watch them during the holidays. And The Wizard of Oz was the second one that I ever did, and then last year I did the Snow Queen from Narnia, so that's fun. I don't know what I'm doing this year. I have a Pinterest board. I'll figure it out. And just this year I did Mythological May. That's an art challenge that I do so that I can give myself the opportunity to make like stickers or things for my portfolio and stuff like that. And since I was fresh off of reading all of the books, I drew Dorothy Gale, and this is kind of how I picture her now. After reading the books, there's still definitely the influence of Judy Garland, but this is how I see her in my brain. I definitely see her as more tomboyish now, maybe a bit more spunky. In my head, that's what Dorothy looks like. So the second book in the Wizard of Oz series is The Marvellous Land of Oz. And as the title suggests, it is lore. It is Oz lore. And I didn't think I was going to like it as much as I did because Dorothy is not the main character of the second book, nor does she appear at all. So get Dorothy out of your brain. So the second book stars a little boy named Tip, and he is this little munchkin boy who lives in the Gillikin country, so where everything is purple, right? And he lives there with a really mean witch named Mombi, and he's essentially her ward and servant. So Mombi has this thing called the Powder of Life, which is this powder that will turn any inanimate object into a sentient creature. And Tip steals that and escapes from her and essentially makes his own cast of misfits to come with him on this journey. And that includes a sawhorse, which is, in my head, I was picturing like a wooden rocking horse. That's not what it is. It's a sawhorse. I will put a picture here. He turns that to life and he rides it like a regular horse. And he also takes with him my son, well, actually his son, Jack Pumpkinhead. Since they're escaping Mombi, they think that the only place that they can go to is to the Emerald City. And so they go to the Emerald City looking for help from the Scarecrow. The King Scarecrow's political career is not going to last very long. By the time Tip and his group of friends get to the Emerald City, there is currently an insurrection. A group of young girls with knitting needles has essentially staged a hostile takeover because they want the Scarecrow gone and they want their general, this girl named Ginger, to be the leader of the Emerald City instead. In order to escape these girls and take the Scarecrow out of there, Tip uses the powder of life to make a creature that is called the Gump. And I love him so much because he's only been alive for a few seconds and already wants to freaking die. If you've seen Return to Oz, then the Gump is in that movie, and then you will know that he's like this thing made out of like furniture in order to get them from point A to point B. And he finds his entire existence undignified. He hates it here. Skipping through certain things, they eventually meet up with the Tin Man, who is still Emperor of the Winky Country, and that stays canon, by the way. And they also meet up with this character called T.E. Wogglebug, who is this giant bug scholar. And when I say giant bug, I mean he's a bug. He's not a scholar of bugs. He is a bug that is also allegedly a scholar. He's very pretentious, but not very smart. Don't tell him that. He becomes a reoccurring character. So all of them get on the Gump and they go over to Glinda and they ask for her help. And this is like a reoccurring thing in all the other books. A bunch of stuff happens from this point on because Glinda then joins the group and wants to help. And there's a lot of like transformation magic. There's this really cool like chase scene between Glinda and Mombi, and a bunch of other stuff happens. But what really struck me is that there is a plot twist. Glinda reveals that neither the Scarecrow nor General Ginger should be the rulers of the Emerald City. The rightful ruler to the throne is a princess named Ozma, and no one has ever seen her since the day that the wizard took over the Emerald City. And that plot twist is that Tip, the little boy who's been the main character this entire time, is actually Princess Ozma. I'm going to try to put like a little graphic here, but know that this is important for later. So Princess Ozma is the daughter of King Pastoria, and King Pastoria was taken care of after the wizard showed up and took over the Emerald City. We have no idea what happens to King Pastoria, and we are never told what happened to King Pastoria. We don't know where he is. He is gone. I assumed that he got murdered. Ozma then gets taken by the wizard and given to the witch Mombi, who then turns her into a little munchkin boy named Tip, who she then raises herself with no idea of who they really were, because they didn't want anyone, especially not Glinda, to know where the real heir of Oz was. And this is the part of the story that really pleasantly surprised me considering when it was written, and that is that once Tip realizes that he is Ozma, his first reaction is to be like, I don't want to be a girl. I really don't want to be a girl. And so his friends tell him that it doesn't matter if it's Tip or if it's Ozma, they're going to respect them either way because they are still capable of everything that they are capable of now. They are still the same person. And so Tip decides to transform back into Ozma so that he can get the throne. And if he doesn't like it, then he'll just turn back into Tip. But once he gets transformed into Ozma, who is described as like the most beautiful and elegant girl in all of Oz, Ozma is Ozma, and that's it. Ozma never turns back into Tip, at least not in any of the original books. And Ozma really embraces being a girl now. And I am so glad that I somehow remained in the dark when it came to the Tip is actually Ozma plotline, because reading it for the first time was truly an experience. It's just so interesting that there is a trans-coded character in a children's book from the 1900s. And obviously this is not a perfect allegory, considering Ozma started off as a girl, was then turned into a boy without her knowledge, and then turned back into a girl, nor do I think L Frank Baum was really trying to take it there. However, the fact that there is a character who literally has a transition from living their life as a boy into their true self, Princess Ozma, who is seen as this beautiful and elegant and kind, empathetic ruler, it's really a pleasant surprise. Plus, Ozma does not ever really regret this choice. Ozma really loves being Ozma, and everybody else seems to love her too. And on the rare occasion where her life as Tip is brought up in a negative light, her friends, and spoilers ahead, especially Dorothy, are always the first to stand up for her and who she is. They love her. Another very sweet example of this new relationship dynamic with Ozma is Jack Pumpkinhead. Jack sees Tip as his father because Tip brought him to life using the powder of life. And now that Tip is Ozma, Jack Pumpkinhead fully embraces him as his mother, essentially. He kind of says something like, oh, my father is now a girl. And from that point on, if he doesn't call Ozma by name, he calls her mom. So the second book ends with Ozma becoming the true ruler of Oz, and the Scarecrow's fine, General Ginger's gone, and we're kind of back to normal. And then we get to book 3, which is Ozma of Oz. The name is kind of misleading because guess who's back? Dorothy. And guess who's the main character again? Dorothy. I think honestly one of my favorites in the entire group of the original 14 that I read, if not my actual favorite. I genuinely think that it's a really fun book. And if you've ever watched the movie Return to Oz, it's essentially this plot plus elements from the second book. So they kind of like got smashed together. This is also the first time that L Frank Baum really decides to type in the dialect so that we can hear everyone's individual accents, and it made me fall in love with Dorothy even more because her Kansas accent is like spelled out for you so that you can really like hear it when she talks. She's my little baby Ted Lasso, what can I say?
Howdy, y'all cowboys. My name is Ted Lasso, and I'm from Kansas. Wow.
We also get some Dorothy family lore, which admittedly less convoluted than Oz lore, but still nice to hear. Her and Uncle Henry are on a boat because they are going to Australia to visit family. Auntie Em is staying home because she's going to take care of the farm. Uncle Henry has kind of been feeling really down and really sick, and so this is kind of like a trip that he can take with his niece and kind of like relax, but that will not come to pass. So there's a storm. There's a storm because Uncle Henry can never really have a single moment of peace. And Dorothy goes off onto the deck looking for Uncle Henry, not knowing that Uncle Henry is looking for her. And she ends up falling overboard on a chicken crate. And when she wakes up, she is now on what is essentially like a beach, which kind of signals to Dorothy, we are no longer in Kansas, baby. We are in fairy country. Dorothy is also not alone. While she may not have Toto this time, she has her pet chicken, who she named Bill because she originally thought that Bill was going to grow up to be a rooster, and now Bill is a girl. And she tries to change Bill's name to Bellina, which is what Bellina is called for the rest of the book series, but Bellina doesn't really care. She can go by Bill or Bellina either way. In fact, I think she says a name is a name and I'm a chicken, something like that. And as a girl who, fun fact, grew up with a pet rooster named Rosa because I was told that she was a chicken at birth and was lied to, I felt really represented by this. Turns out that where she has landed is called the Land of Oz, and it is near Oz, but it's not Oz itself. And this is because this is where the book tries to kind of like expand on the lore. So remember the map that we originally had? Expanded. Oz and lands similar to Oz are just kind of like pockets in our world where fae live. So like think fairies, fairy-like creatures, just fae magic. And if you've watched Return to Oz, again, this is the book that introduces you to the Wheelers, to the Gnome King, to the Hungry Tiger, who I think is really funny. The Hungry Tiger does not show up in the movie, but it is a recurring character. And the Hungry Tiger is, you guessed it, a hungry tiger who is always talking about wanting to eat babies, but he won't. It also introduces you to Princess Langwidere. I hope I'm saying that right. I've only ever read the name. And in the movie, they kind of make the Witch Mombi and Princess Langwidere into like one person, but not true. Once again, another composite character. Princess Langwidere is the one that likes to take her head off and put on different kinds of heads, and kind of wants to take Dorothy's head because she likes to wear different heads for her different outfits. Kind of slay, not gonna lie. She's not necessarily evil, but she is very egotistical.
I say she's not really evil as if she didn't actually threaten to take Dorothy and Ozma's head, but that's neither here nor there. She's kind of like if Aphrodite saw you from across the room and thought you were really pretty and just decided to take your face like Ko the Face Stealer from Avatar and keep it in her collection of beautiful heads. But she's not the main villain. There's bigger fish to fry.
What do you think?
I think you're very beautiful.
I should hope so.
And finally, they introduce you to my baby boy, Tik-Tok, the Clockwork Man. And I love him so much. It's this like big steampunk looking robot that needs to be wound up in order to talk and to think and to walk. And they need to be wound up separately, which is, I think, a manufacturing error. But whatever, I love him so much. So the Gnome King is an important character, and he comes back a lot. He rules what is called the Gnome Kingdom, which is right next to the Land of Oz, but mostly like underground. because the gnomes are this underground cave dwelling species of just people who really love precious rocks and hate eggs. And I will say this about the Gnome King. He is self-aware. He knows that he's evil, and he really doesn't like it when other people are happier than him, and so he chooses to ruin their days. He also has a magic belt, which is important for later. Before Dorothy got there, he had essentially taken over the land of Oz, and he used his magic to transform every single royal family member of the land of Oz into what is essentially like a knickknack, a trinket. He loves trinkets, and as a lover of trinkets, I have to respect him. In this book, Dorothy meets up with some of her old friends, and she also meets Ozma, and they essentially get trapped by the Gnome King. And the Gnome King tells Dorothy that unless she's able to find every single member of the royal family of Oz, who is disguised as like a little knickknack, unless she's able to find each very specific knickknack in his sea of knickknacks, then he's going to turn all of her friends into knickknacks also. And it gets tough because he kind of like makes every single individual person try to guess, and all of them fail and get turned into little trinkets in a different room, and Dorothy doesn't know what trinkets they've turned into, and she has to find the members of the royal family and her friends, and then eventually it's up to her and to Billina the chicken. And I'm, spoilers ahead, but obviously they win, they escape. They beat the Gnome King, they restore order, the royal family of Oz is now in control of the land of Oz once again, and they go back to Oz because Ozma has this special magic carpet that she can use to get across the deadly desert, and they only ever use it that one time. They never use it again for some reason, but they make it back to Oz, and Dorothy becomes best friends with Ozma. They become such good friends, in fact, that Ozma gives Dorothy the title of Princess of Oz and tells her that once she gets back to Kansas, that if she ever needs help or ever just wants to visit or literally anything, all she has to do is give Ozma a very special signal, because Ozma just happens to have this magic picture, so this like magic mirror that she can use to look at Dorothy or literally any dimension ever at like exactly 4 p.m. And if Dorothy gives her the signal, then that means that Ozma can help her. Very convoluted, but I kind of love it. And then Dorothy uses the magic belt to get back to Kansas. And that's the end of the third book. Book 4 is titled Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, and the lore gets so weird in this one. It gets really convoluted after this. So, in this one, Dorothy is in California visiting relatives. And instead of her dog Toto, she has a new kitten named Eureka. She's currently hanging out with her older cousin. I assume he's like a teenager named Zeb, and his horse Jim, when suddenly there's like an earthquake and there's like a crack in the earth and they fall down into this like underground world that's run by vegetable people who express little to no emotion, and they don't have empathy. For some reason, they think that Dorothy is somehow the cause of the earthquakes, because apparently there have never been earthquakes ever, and they blame her for the destruction of all of their invisible glass homes, and they decide to execute her. But right before they are put to death, the wizard from the first book descends down in his little air balloon. He also, for some reason, has like 9 tiny little piglets that he puts in his pocket, and they can do tricks. They also reveal his name because I guess it got really annoying having to call him the Wizard of Oz when there's the Land of Oz, and he's the world is clearly not named after him, considering there's people like Ozma. So they reveal that his name is actually Oscar Soroster Phaedric Isaac Norman Henkel Emmanuel Ambrose Diggs. Oz for short. Pure coincidence. This book also has magic fruit that turns you invisible so that you can hide from invisible man-eating bears. It has gargoyle creatures made entirely out of wood and hungry baby dragons. By the end of the book, because I'm skipping over a ton of plot, Dorothy finally uses that magic signal that Ozma told her to use in the last book, and together, along with Dorothy's magic belt, because she took it from the Gnome King, it is hers now. I'm not going to call it the gnome's magic belt. They essentially get everybody out of there and into the Land of Oz instead. For some reason, everybody in Oz seems super chill with the wizard. So chill, in fact, that no one seems to mind that he's back. No one's upset with him for his years of lying. And they kind of like embrace him with open arms. So much to the point that Glinda even offers to teach him how to do real magic as her apprentice. And this is where the real first retcon ever happens. Because like I said in the second book, the wizard is very complicit in what happens to Ozma. In fact, I would argue he's not only complicit, he is the instigator of everything that happens to her. He is a villain. He caused this. But for some reason in the fourth book, they wanted to make it clear that he had nothing to do with it. My guess is that L Frank Baum really wanted to turn the wizard into this like zany uncle character so that he could be a recurring character in the rest of the books. And you can't really do that if he was totally okay with possibly killing the king and getting rid of that king's baby. And once again, there is no answer as to where King Pastoria is, which does kind of bother me because I do wish that more adaptations really made him the villain. I think that's why I genuinely enjoyed the Wicked book. But from here on out, you gotta think Uncle Iroh vibes instead. I do want to bring this up before I end this part of the video, and that is that once you go to fairy country with an animal, that animal should be able to talk. Eureka the cat has been able to talk. Jim the horse has been able to talk. And yet for some reason Toto was just yapping along the first book. So that's a pretty big plot hole that will be addressed later. There's also a mini plot line about Eureka the kitten being put to trial for murder. She's fine, and we don't have to really get into that. She's okay. Just know that you can put a kitten on trial for murder. And frankly, if that was a law in real life, I think more cats would have some better behavior. And at the end of Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, all of the characters minus the wizard get transported back to their respective homes. The fifth book in the series is The Road to Oz, and the beginning of The Road to Oz is giving quintessential children's fantasy. And what I mean by that is that it's kind of ominous if you think about it for a little bit too long, but it's very whimsical. So, you know, we're gonna have fun. It starts with Dorothy walking with Toto along the road in her Kansas farm when this guy comes up to her and asks her for directions. His name is the Shaggy Man. We're never actually given an actual name. Everyone just calls him the Shaggy Man. No one calls him Shaggy. They call him the Shaggy Man. Basically, he's like this friendly hippie kind of guy, and his clothes are always like in rags and tatters and tassels. Just think a shaggy person. Since Dorothy knows the way around the farm, she has no problem just taking that guy to where he needs to go because it's apparently pretty close by. But when they're walking, their surroundings change, and suddenly they're in front of this path that splits into 7 different paths. And that's never been there before ever. But Dorothy kind of like takes this in stride. She's seen enough fairy nonsense to not really be bothered by this. And so they pick the 7th one, hoping that they won't get too lost. As is the formula for these books by now, once Dorothy chooses the 7th path, she ends up in what is essentially Fey World again. She doesn't know where she is, and she ends up meeting people along the way who come with her on her journey back home. The second new character that Dorothy meets in this book is a little boy called Button Bright. He's this boy who is supposed to be slightly younger than her, very curious, very distracted, not the brightest. And it's implied that he might also be like a little rich boy who gets lost all the time based on his clothing, and he has absolutely gigantic blue eyes. Keep that in mind just for the vibes, really. I like to picture the little blue boy from the Coraline picture. And she also meets a character that I think is very cute, and her name is Polychrome. She is the daughter of literally the rainbow, because in this world, the rainbow is kind of like a god man who kind of carries the rainbow all over the world, and his little colorful fairy daughters dance on the rainbow, and Polychrome is always falling off the rainbow because she's too busy dancing. Once the gang is Dorothy, the Shaggy Man, Button Bright, Polychrome, and Toto, they go through a series of little misadventures because it's very easy to tell by now that they are just in Oz, and so there's not really that much of a worry on how they're gonna get home because Dorothy's done this a few times at this point. She does not care anymore. For her, this is like a little tiny surprise adventure. And The Road to Oz is definitely a Alice in Wonderland kind of story where Dorothy's supposed to somehow be the middleman, the average Joe, and they have to go through all of these little kingdoms where the logic is just not making any sense and no one is acting normal, at least by Oz standards. One of the kingdoms that they interact with is a kingdom where all of the citizens are anthropomorphic foxes and they wear little period piece clothing and they have what is essentially a royal family, and the king is just kind of like a very irresponsible, silly little fox king. The king is so charmed by Button Bright that as a reward, he changes his head from a human head to a fox head. Obviously, Button Bright is not excited about this and he starts crying, and the king is like, I don't know why you're crying. I made you extra handsome. The same thing happens to the Shaggy Man because they go to a neighboring kingdom where the king is an anthropomorphic donkey and he changes his head to be a donkey head. And so now Dorothy is just walking along with a little tiny rainbow fairy, her dog, and then two boys with animal heads. And both of the characters, so the Shaggy Man and Button Bright, are kind of stuck with these animal heads for most of the book, up until they find a place called the Truth Pond, which does make reoccurring appearances in other books, but frankly, I think it's underutilized. And speaking of the Shaggy Man, I do think that he's a very interesting character because I like to think that he is very similar to Dorothy in the sense that he seems to have some kind of experience with fairy magic. So like the Shaggy Man, he's not like Dorothy in the sense that he has been to Oz before. This is the first time he's ever been here, but I do believe, based on the way that he talks, that he must have some kind of interest or knowledge in like the spiritual realm or in magic in general, because he, while not as nonchalant as Dorothy, he's definitely very open-minded to everything that's happening to him. He also has this thing called the love magnet, which is important in later books. This is the first time it's introduced. And the love magnet is a literal magnet that has magical properties that makes it so that anyone around you is instantly in love with you and wants to take care of you. And when I say in love with you, I don't necessarily mean in the romantic context. I mean as in you're suddenly endeared to him instantly and you don't want to do him harm, which is really important for him, I guess, since he's kind of like a nomad going through the world without like a home or anywhere to go, and so he doesn't get hurt that way. And it's really interesting because I think the love magnet is a really fun kind of narrative device, but if it was given to literally any other character, I was gonna say actor, if it was given to any other character, it could definitely lead to like a Kilgrave kind of situation.
Yes? You'd like to invite me in? Absolutely.
A lot of questions about consent, all that. And there are things that are asked in terms of the ethics of the love magnet in later books, but I just think that's really interesting. He just kind of like keeps it in his pocket. In my head, he kind of looks like a hairier Matthew Lillard. During this journey, like I said before, Dorothy starts to meet a lot of random people from a bunch of random villages. And throughout the book, all of them are very excited to meet Dorothy because she knows Ozma personally and they all want to get invited to Ozma's birthday party. It's the event of the season. So I'm obviously skipping ahead about quite a few things, but by the end of the book, Dorothy ends up in the Emerald City and she's warmly welcomed by all of her friends from like the previous books, including Ozma in her little chariot, and she loves Ozma so much. And that's really important for the rest of the books. They are like this. And while I was reading this book, I kind of started to realize that if anyone ever adapts all of the original Wizard of Oz books into anything, it should probably be a cartoon kind of in the style of Adventure Time. Because at this party, there's a bunch of random like cameos from random celebrities and aristocrats and royal families from all over Oz, and there's like a princess for everything or a prince for everything. You know, there's a kingdom that's entirely made out of candy. The people from the land of Ev are here. Santa Claus for some reason. Narnia The Wizard of Oz. Santa Claus cameo. The Shaggy Man also, I guess, kind of changes as the book continues because he really falls in love with Oz and requests to stay there permanently. And Ozma allows this. However, she does take away his love magnet so that she can put it at the gates of the Emerald City so that everyone that comes in can feel loved, which is, I guess, a sweet sentiment, but it's not there permanently because the love magnet is used throughout the books over and over again. It's not a permanent fixture. Once the celebration of Ozma's birthday is finally over, Dorothy obviously wants to go back home, and so the wizard has been working on magic transportation bubbles.
She wore a crown and she came down in a bubble, dog. I'm not fighting with you.
And so Polychrome gets to use the bubble to go back to her rainbow father. Button Bright goes in the bubble with Santa Claus to go to, I think, Baltimore. And then Dorothy gets in the bubble with Toto to go back to Kansas. And that's where the book ends. So book 6 is the Emerald City of Oz. And I would like to say, I think one of my only critiques of this box set is that the titles are not in order on the front of the book. So that's a little weird. In the book, The Emerald City of Oz, we finally get some kind of POV on what is going on with Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, and it gets a little depressing. If you've read a book like The Chronicles of Narnia, you might think that The Wizard of Oz is following the same logic, where her spending a few days in Oz is the equivalent to a few hours in Kansas. But unfortunately, that's not true. If it takes her 8 days to get from, I don't know, the farthest end of Munchkinland to the Emerald City to get back home, then that means that she has been missing in Kansas for 8 days. So that means that for 8 days, Uncle Henry and Aunt Em have no idea where she is and are freaking out. The books don't necessarily chronicle every single time that she goes to visit her friends in Oz, because she can go really whenever she wants. And so they have no idea where she is, usually for long stretches of time. And it's not from Dorothy's lack of trying. Dorothy will talk at length about her adventures and the worlds and the people that she meets to her aunt and uncle, and they just don't believe her. And it's not that they're being dismissive or condescending, it's just very far-fetched, and they're genuinely concerned for her. One of the little details that I really like about Aunt Em and Uncle Henry's point of view is that they do bring up Dorothy's mother. As we know, Dorothy is being raised by her elderly aunt and uncle, and it's because her parents have died. And Dorothy's parents aren't really talked about at length at any given point, but at least in this book they do bring up that Dorothy's mother was this very free-spirited, very curious, distractible girl when she was younger. And so I like to headcanon that, like Dorothy, she was kind of like susceptible to fae nonsense, and that maybe she herself has had adventures or interactions with people like that. She's just never been to Oz that we know of. Who's to say? We don't know much about Dorothy's mother. I just think it's really interesting that they bring up the similarities that Dorothy has with her late mother. Considering everything that happens to Dorothy, I think it'd be kind of cute. It's also explained what happened to the farm after the events of the first book. So after the cyclone hit and Dorothy was taken in the house with the tornado, the house and the property were completely destroyed, and Dorothy just magically comes back home days later. Basically, after the events of the first book, the house is destroyed, they're in debt, Uncle Henry has to take out a mortgage on the farm, and Dorothy's nowhere to be found. And when she does come back, she has no real excuse for where she's been all this time. Obviously, she does. They don't know that. And so I'm sure that for a few days, they were just kind of like, our girl's traumatized and we have no money. Obviously, Aunt Em and Uncle Henry do not have the easiest life. And on top of that, they're really worried about Dorothy, because if they don't get the money soon, the bank is going to seize the farm and they're essentially going to be homeless. And their main worry isn't really themselves, even though they're like these two elderly people who definitely should not be kicked out on the streets. Their main worry is their little girl, like what's going to happen to her, especially because if something happens to Aunt Em and Uncle Henry, who's going to take care of Dorothy? So once Dorothy learns about all of this, she promises them that she's going to solve their problems. And so she uses her special signal to Ozma to go to Oz so that she can beg Ozma to let her aunt and uncle come with her and stay in the Emerald City. And I'd like to point out that she tells them what she's going to do. She tells them, I'm going to use my special signal and my fairy friend is going to take me and I'm not going to be in my room once you go check because I will be in Oz begging, pleading for her to let you stay there. And they're like, oh, okay. And then they check her room, she's missing, and they're like, oh. Obviously Ozma says yes, because why on earth would she deny Dorothy this request to like let her elderly poor aunt and uncle come to Emerald City when they have a bunch of rooms and she loves Dorothy so much? Like, why would she say no? And so they use Dorothy's magic belt to get Aunt Em and Uncle Henry to Oz. And honestly, I think they handled this pretty well, because I think I would freak out a little bit more. Quick pause to talk about another retcon. So in the book, it is explained that, at least in the first one, that the Emerald City is not actually made out of emeralds. Sure, it's probably like a very beautiful, beautiful city, but the whole idea that everything is green and everything is made out of emeralds is a lie created by the wizard, and that's why everybody has to wear those little spectacles. And we haven't seen those little spectacles since the first book, so I guess it's implied that, you know, after the whole wizard thing, nobody ever wore those and everything was fine. Except now, in this book, there's still no spectacles, but everything is made out of emeralds. So I feel like I'm being lied to, especially because it is described in such an ornate fashion. Every single room is described to you. So let's say that you went to the bathroom. The book will literally be like, and then she sat on the emerald toilet seat and she flushed and she used a napkin that had little tiny emeralds encrusted on it. And then she used the faucet, and the faucet was made out of pure emeralds with rubies all over the edge. What's going on? Anyway, back to the story. So obviously Aunt Em and Uncle Henry are deeply confused, especially because Ozma shows up and she's just like a literal fairy princess, and she's like, Aunt Em, Uncle Henry, welcome. Just know that you are allowed to live here forever with Princess Dorothy, and you never have to work again. And I bring up the never having to work again thing because Ozma mentions in this book that in the land of Oz, money does not exist. So that means that if you live in the Emerald City is supposed to be this utopian socialist society where the people work because they want to and they enjoy doing it, and everyone shares and no one is poor. This is contradicted in some other books, but overall, that is the ethos of the Emerald City. But just like my grandma, Dorothy's aunt and uncle do not know how to handle essentially being retired and never having to worry about money again, because they can't fathom a life where they don't have a job. And in fact, they ask Ozma if they can have a farm. Dorothy can kind of sense that Aunt Em and Uncle Henry are very confused and very overwhelmed because, let's be honest, let's set the scene. They were literally just in Kansas worrying about being homeless a few seconds ago, and now they're in a utopian emerald society where the figure of authority is a little girl who is very close to Dorothy in age, who is telling them that they never have to work again. And on top of that, there's a scarecrow that is alive. There is a big robot man. There's talking animals, specifically a hungry tiger that keeps talking about wanting to eat babies. There's a lot to take in. So Dorothy decides, for some reason, that the best thing to do is to sort of like give them a tour of Oz. But instead of taking them to places that she's been to before, that she's familiar with, so that she can kind of like ease them into it, she decides to do what we did in Road to Oz, and that's go to a bunch of different kingdoms where everything is different and weird, and she doesn't know these people, and it's kind of just like, well, we're in Oz, baby, get used to it. I chose not to write this in my script because I thought that it would be like a lot of information, but I do like a lot of the little kingdoms that they visit in this book. Specifically, there's a place where everyone is a little bunny rabbit, and there's a place where everyone is made out of dough. So like think bred people. While Dorothy is trying to convince her aunt and uncle that everything is fine and normal and that they're gonna have such a great time in Oz, the Gnome King has returned. The Gnome King is very upset about what happened to him during his last appearance in the books, and he wants to get revenge against the people of Oz. But since he doesn't have his magic belt anymore and he lives in the Gnome Kingdom, he needs to cross the Deadly Desert. So his plan is not to go over it, but to dig a tunnel underground until he makes it to Oz. His gnome general did object, however, so he got tortured and murdered. Anyway, so now the Gnome King needs powerful allies to go against Ozma. So he sends this one specific gnome, who kind of hates him, but we don't have to get into that too much right now, to go all over Non-Estica to find allies. And you're probably thinking, what the hell is Non-Estica? And that's easy. So, like I said, you remember this map? So in this map, remember, we have Emerald City in the middle, 4 quadrants of Oz, outskirts of Oz, and then there is the Deadly Desert surrounding that, and then around the Deadly Desert is more land. So we have the Land of Oz, and we have the Gnome Kingdom. And then there is a sea. That's how Dorothy went from a boat going to Australia to the Land of Oz. And in this sea, anything that kind of touches that coastline is called Non-Estica, because that's the non-estic sea. But all of the new allies that have agreed to help the Gnome King are very scary and definitely worse than him, and definitely plotting to do something to him once they get to Oz too. But he is nothing if not delusional. But this is a book series that definitely has a very specific formula, and so Ozma knows about all of this because Ozma was able to witness it happening from her magic mirror. So while Dorothy's off taking her aunt and uncle on adventures with a few of her friends, Ozma is at home freaking out. Once Dorothy gets back, her, Ozma, and some of their other friends are kind of planning what they're going to do about this imminent invasion. Another pause. Something that I think we really need to talk about is the fact that, allegedly, Oz is a utopian society where everyone is free and happy, but Ozma just happens to have a magic picture that allows her to see what literally every single person is doing whenever she wants, in any dimension, at any given time, with or without their consent. And similarly, Glinda, who is essentially kind of like Ozma's advisor at this point, has a thing called the Book of Records, which tells you, as it is happening, what every single person is doing. This is a surveillance state, gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss. So Dorothy and the gang try to come up with a plan for what they're going to do once the Gnome King and his allies storm the Emerald City, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to fight these people. But Ozma rejects every single one of their options because she never wants to harm a living creature. And so she would rather not do anything than fight them. And so they come up with this plan where it's a very cartoonish plan. The plan is that using magic, they're going to fill the tunnel with a bunch of dust so that the Gnome King and his army will get really, really thirsty. And once they reach the Emerald City, they're just gonna have to drink water from the only water source available. Conveniently, the only source of water in the square is the Fountain of Oblivion, that once you drink it, you lose your memory. Once the army gets out of the tunnel, they make a break straight for the Fountain of Oblivion, and they just chug that water and they lose all their memory. Once all of it is settled and Ozma can now send the now harmless villains back to their homes, Glinda puts a protection spell around the 4 quadrants of Oz. And this is supposed to mean that anyone outside of Oz can't just barge their way in without permission. You can't see it from above, you can't try to tunnel your way in, and you're kind of protected from the rest of the world, Wakanda style. The Emerald City of Oz is clearly supposed to be the last book in the franchise, or at least it was supposed to be. And you can tell because L Frank Baum has an author's note at the start of each story. And in each author's note, he kind of explains that he's not really an author. He's a historian of Oz. And so he explains to the children that are possibly reading this book that it's not that he's inventing this world, it's that Dorothy herself is telling him all these stories and he's putting them in books for kids to read. And now that Glinda has put this protection spell over Oz, communication is over and he can't talk to Dorothy anymore. He wrote 8 books after this one, so that clearly did not work. So Baum comes back with the Patchwork Girl of Oz, and his excuse to readers is that Dorothy now communicates with him via wireless telegraph. And the Patchwork Girl of Oz is a very interesting book if, like me, you overthink things that are specifically made for children, because I left this book with many very specific world-building questions. The main ones being, who gets rights in Oz? How are laws enforced in Oz? Is Ozma a good ruler? And none of these questions are questions that I think Baum wanted us to ask, but they're questions that I asked. You can tell that Baum wanted to stop focusing on Dorothy for a while, because while she does show up in this book, the main character of this book is this boy called Ojo the Unlucky. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be pronounced Ojo the Unlucky, but this is a Hispanic home, and I've decided that he's Latino now, so it's Ojo. Ojo is this little munchkin boy who lives with his uncle in poverty. And I have to ask, how? I thought we lived in a utopian society where money didn't exist. How is he poor? So Ojo is called Ojo the Unlucky, and he is convinced that he is born and doomed to be unlucky forever. He's left-handed. I think he was born on the 13th. Just a lot of coincidences. And he is convinced that he is just never supposed to have a good time. So one day, Ojo and his uncle decide to go visit a magician who lives near them called Dr. Pipt. P-I-P-T. Pipt? Pipt. I keep saying Pip, and I know that's not right. Anyway, he is the magician that made the original powder of life that Mombi had in book 3. He's in the process of making more of that powder of life because his wife has made this rag doll that she wants to bring to life so that the rag doll can be her servant. So Ojo does not really like the idea that they're going to make this patchwork girl into a slave because they have chosen all of her traits for her before they've put in the powder of life, and they want her to be this very submissive, not very intelligent girl with no free will or curiosity, and he just does not vibe with that. And so when they're not looking, he adds extra intelligence and extra curiosity and a bunch of other things. And so once they use the powder of life, Scraps, the patchwork girl, is born, and she's very silly and she loves to do cartwheels and she loves to talk in rhyme and poetry, and I love her so much. During all this hoopla, there is an accident, and Dr. Pip's wife and Ojo's uncle get turned to stone. The magician knows how to cure them, but he has to stay at home stirring his little potion thing or whatever. And so he sends Ojo out on a quest to find very specific ingredients for him. He needs 3 hairs from a woozy's tail. This is a creature that has never shown up before. It's introduced in this book. He needs water from a dark well, a drop of oil from a live man's body, a 6-leaved clover, and a wing of a yellow butterfly. And so now Ojo has to go and find 5 ingredients. Once again, like is the formula for most of these books, Ojo has to go on a quest and he has to bring or find friends along the way. He takes Scraps the patchwork girl with him, and he also takes Dr. Pip's glass cat. It's this like figurine cat thing that he used the powder of life on, except she is very vain and self-centered, and she always brings up the fact that you can see her like brains work, so she must be very intelligent. And the 3 of them just set off on this journey, and the first thing they find is a woozy. A woozy is supposed to be this like square creature, like a square head, a square body, square limbs, everything is square. It has holes for ears. It's like a menacing, allegedly menacing creature who can shoot fire out of his eyes. But I thought he in my brain, because I didn't see an illustration for this, I was picturing like a square, small elephant. The woozy wants to help, but it's hair on its tail. He only has 3 hairs, so exactly what they need, but it can't come off. It's too hard. And so he just kind of goes with them on their journey. And along the way, they also find the Shaggy Man. The Shaggy Man decides to help them, but he does warn Oho that this is all illegal. And put a pin in that. We're going to talk about that in a second. They eventually reach the Emerald City, and Oho needs the 6-leaved clover, but he's not allowed to just take them, and so he steals one, and then Ozma puts him in jail. And granted, it seems like Ozma doesn't really believe in jail, because the prison that she sends Oho to is really just like a really nice ornate room that he only has to stay in for like a little bit to really think about his actions, because she's like, disappointment is enough. And it kind of is for him, but then he's on trial, so it feels like an overreaction considering it's just a 6-leaved clover. Once on trial, Oho has to explain his situation, and he brings up the fact that he's doing all of this to save his uncle. And so Dorothy obviously is immediately on board, and she really wants to help him. And so does the Scarecrow, and so they kind of join his group. Also, very cute, the Scarecrow kind of develops a little crush on the Patchwork Girl. He genuinely thinks that she is the most beautiful person he's ever seen. And she is also convinced that she is the most beautiful person in the world. She has absolutely no self-consciousness, which is really great, because throughout the book, everyone makes it sound as if she is hideous and garish, and because she's made out of different like patches of fabric, and they're like, it's so overwhelming, it's too much to even look at. And I'm like, leave her alone, she slays. Now that we're on the subject of the Patchwork Girl, I have notes, because I'd like to point out that in the entire book, Scraps is told that once this quest is over, she needs to go back to be a slave for Dr. Pip's wife, despite clearly not wanting to, not liking that idea. And so I have to ask, is she not worthy of rights?
Did you know that you have rights? The Constitution says you do.
Because the Scarecrow is out here walking around, and no one is telling him that he needs to go back and be a scarecrow on that Munchkin farm. And it's almost as if the Scarecrow is treated like a capable and conscious being because he rose to life on his own. It was kind of sudden, like they were working on the Scarecrow and he just happened to gain life, whereas the Patchwork Girl was brought to life by the powder, so it's almost as if she's seen as a lesser creature. So does the Scarecrow get human rights because his owner didn't intend for him to come to life, so that's seen as more valid? And something very similar happens with Tik-Tok. I love Tik-Tok, and Tik-Tok loves Dorothy. But throughout the entirety of the series, there's little quips about how Tik-Tok does not actually possess the capacity for love. Like, it's not the same as everyone else's love of Dorothy, almost. And he even kind of, like, accepts it, which I don't think is fair. And everyone always says, oh, like, Tik-Tok kind of loves Dorothy, but he'll never really possess the real kind of love that everybody else does because he's just an automaton. And I just find that really rude, and it hurts my feelings personally. Moving on, the gang ends up going to meet the Tin Man in Winky Country because yes, he is still the emperor of the very yellow Winky Country. In the Tin Man's palace, they are able to get another one of the ingredients, which is oil from a live man's body. They just get it from the Tin Man. And they ask him for help in getting any of the other ingredients, but he absolutely refuses once he finds out that one of the ingredients is the wing of a butterfly, because the Tin Man hates hurting any living creature, even if it's to help another. And I'm gonna assume that this is a new personality trait, because he literally killed a pack of wolves with an axe in the first book. So this is new. By now, Oho has all of the ingredients except for the butterfly's wing, and so they walk back to the Emerald City. And once they get there, Ozma tells them that this entire quest is meaningless anyway, because doing magic is now illegal in Oz. This brings up some of my questions from before, because the law now states that only Glinda and the wizard can practice magic in all of Oz, meaning that Dr. Pip and any other witch or wizard throughout the land have no right to study magic anymore. The wizard ends up breaking the spell on Dr. Pip's wife and Ojo's uncle, and so that means that Ojo gets his uncle back. They also get a house now in the Emerald City, and Scraps is allowed to stay in the Emerald City. Also, she does not have to go back to be a servant. But at the end of the day, there's more questions than answers, politically at least, because why is it acceptable for Ozma and Glinda to decide who can and can't study magic? Because that feels like such a wild abuse of power that no one ever seems to question except for villains in other books, and that leaves a weird taste in my mouth. Because imagine that you're a good witch in a random part of Oz, and suddenly a ruler that has been missing for decades comes back and decides to strip you of your titles. You're not even allowed to use it to like charm a teapot to pour things for you or wash your clothes magically. You literally cannot use your magic ever again, because the only people who are now legally allowed to study magic are Glinda and the wizard, a man who has a history of fraud. As a witch enthusiast, I think I would be rioting in the streets. Book 8 is Tik-Tok of Oz, and this book has quite a few newer characters, but the start of the book focuses on a character that was already introduced in book 5, which is Queen Anne. Queen Anne is the leader of a very, very, very small kingdom. There's not really that many people. And one day she wakes up kind of bored and frustrated by this, and she decides that the best course of action is to just take over Oz and essentially conquer that land for herself. And her own sister tells her that this is not a good idea, but she doesn't listen to her, and so she gets 17 of the men in her village to just march in the general direction of the Emerald City. And I haven't really brought this up because it didn't really seem relevant, but there is technically an army in Emerald City. Obviously, we know that there are soldiers in Oz, at least in the Emerald City, when we read the first book. However, in the third book, it's explained that Ozma's army is a group of 27 men, all generals, no privates. But just know that it used to be a bunch of generals telling their one private what to do, and then that private got promoted, so now they just kind of do nothing. And Glinda also has an army. I have brought that up before. She has an all-female army with spears, and they like to do embroidery, but they don't really show up as much either. And that's because in the later books, Baum has decided that death does not exist in the land of Oz. So Baum kind of decides halfway through writing these books that death is just not a thing in Oz. Happy, happy, kumbaya. However, this leads to more questions than answers. More horrifying questions than anything, because that means, let's say that you get sliced in half or that you get decapitated. You are technically still alive. What do you do then? And so there are lots of characters from the earlier books that did die, and they just either never show up again, or we're just supposed to pretend that they're fine now. So I guess it's kind of like cartoon logic, which is why I say that a good way to adapt the Wizard of Oz original books is to just make them cartoons where this kind of thing isn't really an issue. But if you're trying to have an adaptation that's a little bit more grounded in reality, it kind of ruins the whole thing. Because what happened to the Wicked Witch of the East? What happened to the Wicked Witch of the West? These are questions that will never really be answered. Are the Wicked Witches just a puddle and a pile of dust under a house? What happened to the wolves that the Tin Man chopped up in the first book? What happened to the bees? Where is Ozma's dad? Can the people of Oz age? And if they do, what really happens to them? Because in the first few books, we're introduced to characters of all ages. You know, the Witch of the North is an elderly woman. Ozma and many of the other princesses are kind of in the same age bracket, from like child, tween, teenager, right? And so what happens to you? Why would you age? Do you stop aging at any point in time? Lots of questions that we have to ask, because now death is not a thing. So while we ponder these horrific thoughts, There's a new character in this book named Betsy Bobbin, and she is slightly older than Dorothy, and once again, she is a girl from the United States of America who just randomly stumbles into this fairy pocket dimension. She, like Dorothy, ends up getting washed up on the non-Aztec shore with her pet mule, Hank. Hank can now talk. And I know I said that she is from the United States already, but to be more specific, she is from Oklahoma. And I'm starting to think that the only way that you can make it to the world of Oz is if you're a person from the United States of America who gets involved in some freak accident. Either you fall off a boat, a twister hits your house, you get lost in a hurricane, you fall through a crack in the earth, just anything wrong that could happen to you, you're just gonna end up in Oz. So I have a question. If I'm from Puerto Rico, is there a fairy dimension here? And can I go there? Because I too would like to not have to pay for housing. From here on out, the plot is kind of all over the place because there are a lot of like moving characters. So Betsy Bobbin ends up meeting with the Shaggy Man, who is on a quest. I will explain more about that later. And they end up being at this place that's kind of like a kingdom of flower people. And they meet this one specific princess named Princess Ozga. And if you're wondering, that name sounds really familiar, it's because she's Ozma's distant cousin. The flowers from that flower kingdom are very rude and very mean, and they don't really like her after she gets like picked, because it's like a whole thing. And so they banish her, and now Ozga has to also join their quest. And it's implied, well, not even really implied, they outright state this, but once again, there's more questions than answers, that since she was banished, she is still a fairy, like how Ozma is a fairy, but she is like mortal now. And if death doesn't exist, what does that really mean, and how is it different than being anybody else? Anyway, put a pin in that. Let's get back to the Shaggy Man. The Shaggy Man is on a quest to find his brother, who apparently went missing digging in the mines of Colorado. He is convinced that his brother is not dead or missing. It's that he has somehow made it to Oz or literally any of the other places in this like fairy pocket dimension, and he needs to go save him. So like with all of these books, they become like a team because one, what's Betsy Bobbin gonna do? She just showed up here with her meal. She doesn't know where anything is. And what's Ozga gonna do? She was banished. Might as well make like a little team. And as they're walking, they also meet up with Polychrome. She's back. And even though Polychrome definitely knows who the Shaggy Man is because they were literally introduced together, they never really acknowledge the fact that they've met before, and that's never brought up. I can only assume that it's that Polychrome forgot who the Shaggy Man even freaking was. Once the four of them plus Hank the mule are walking around, they end up finding a well, and inside the well is Tik-Tok the Clockwork Man. It turns out the Gnome King has returned. Remember he lost all his memories? Well, he's back now. He has a new name. I would pronounce it Rugelo, but I would change the pronunciation in my head all the time, so however you want to say that, it's fine. It literally doesn't matter, as I'm going to keep calling him the Gnome King. Anyway, he's back. And frankly, I think he's gotten worse after the whole losing his memory situation, because he pushed down Tik-Tok the Clockwork Man down a well. His worst crime. Who does that to my baby boy? And he couldn't get out of the well because he powered down. So on this hand, we have Shaggy Man, Betsy Bobbin, Tik-Tok, Ozga, Polychrome, and Hank the Mule, right? On this hand, we have Queen Anne. What's Queen Anne doing, you might ask? So Queen Anne and her very incompetent army have been met with a series of obstacles. And one of those men has left her group, by the way, and has joined this group. And he has a very specific, very cute relationship with Ozga, but we're not going to get too much into that because it's not really important for the plot. So Queen Anne is in a bit of a pickle because the Gnome King is now insanely paranoid about anyone finding his gnome kingdom. And so whenever anyone's close enough to his kingdom, he just kind of like attacks them, I guess is the best way to describe what's happening. He kicks Tik-Tok down a well, and then he kicks him and Group A down a tube. And Queen Anne and her army kind of get put in what is essentially a saw trap. The gnomes really seem to love warfare. The gnomes just really seem to enjoy booby traps. I think that's like their thing. And obviously I'm exaggerating when I say saw trap, but it was kind of like a pit with like spikes, and they were gonna get crushed, which once again, if no one dies, lots of questions there. Anyway, it's like a pit, and they escape by tunneling into like a small cavern, I guess, and they crawl around and they ruin their clothes, and they seem more upset about their clothes getting ruined than dying, so maybe they're fine. But anyway, let's get back to Group A, who fell down a tube. In my head, I was picturing a very fancy, like, slide. But anyway, they go down the tube and they land in another dimension. The world that they find themselves in is a world where there are like these perfect beings who, if you ask me, have very ominous energy. I don't know if that's the energy that I was supposed to read, but I definitely read it because they're all like chiseled and gorgeous and like expressionless, and they all have like superpowers. I was picturing like people from Krypton. I also read it as like very culty. They named their leader the Private Citizen. And honestly, if they just called him the Private Citizen the entire time, he would be way scarier. However, his real name is Tititi Hoochoo. His real name is Tititi Hoochoo. And so, this is a book for children, and apparently I am nothing if not a child because I laugh every single time I say Tititi Hoochoo. Anyway, Tititi Hoochoo is, in my head, like a supremacist or something, because he doesn't want anyone from anywhere else soiling his land. He doesn't like it when people just enter his dimension and they dirty up the place. I don't like the way he talks. And he seems to have a really personal beef with the Gnome King specifically. I assume because he keeps throwing things down the tube that leads to his dimension. My question is, how did he know that the tube led to that dimension? Because I don't remember if they explain that. I'm sure they do. I just read 15 books really quickly and then waited 2 months to film this video. So that's on me. The Private Citizen decides not to punish them for falling down the tube, which frankly I would be annoyed that that's even a question. I was pushed down a tube. Why would I get put in jail or something? Anyway, beside the point. And he decides that he is going to punish the Gnome King because he's had it with him. And so he sends a dragon that is being punished, by the way. He's like on timeout or something. And so he has to do this chore of taking them through the tube again and then taking away the Gnome King's magic. Once they get back through the tube and they make it at the Gnome Kingdom's cave entrance, it's a whole like power struggle thing because they want to get rid of the Gnome King themselves before the dragon can like intervene. And also Queen Anne has now escaped, by the way. Queen Anne and her army is fine, and now Queen Anne has decided that taking over Oz is just way too much of a hassle and she's tired of it already. Eventually, the gang is able to use eggs to get the Gnome King out of the Gnome Kingdom, like scare him away. Quox, because that's the dragon's name, Quox. He takes away his magic, so now he also has no magic. And they appoint Calico, who is his like second in command guy, to being king instead, and they banish the Gnome King. And you know what? Good for Calico for getting this promotion, because the Gnome King used to do this thing where he'd get mad at him for like literally anything and throw his scepter at his head. And that's just an abuse of power. Now that the former Gnome King is out of the way, Calico, the new Gnome King, decides to help out the gang in any way that he can, specifically because the Shaggy Man has not given up his quest to find his brother, and they find out that his brother did in fact go through one of those little pocket dimension things in a Colorado cave system and make it to the Gnome Kingdom, and the former Gnome King essentially captured him and tortured him by changing his physical appearance. He put like an ugly spell on him. And this portion of the book is just about the Shaggy Man's brother. Ever since he ended up in this fairy pocket dimension and he got trapped in the Gnome King's kingdom, he's been walking around in this place called the Metal Forest, if I'm not wrong, where everything is made out of metal and like gems and stuff. And he has a bag over his head and he doesn't want anyone to see him because he's so hideously ugly. And since the former Gnome King is gone and he has no more magic, the only way to reverse the ugliness spell is for a true fairy to give him a little kiss. And when I tell you that every single girl in that group acted like this was the worst thing in the world and how they're just gonna have to brave through it because he's just so ugly, I feel like I would have died on the spot. Because, like, I know that already. An ugliness spell was placed upon me. You don't need to barf in your mouth. Because if they could gag in a polite way, they would. Because they would say things along the lines of, oh my god, he's just so freaking ugly. But I'm a good person and I will do this for you if it makes you happy.
What is wrong with you people? Afraid to look ugliness in the face? Well, here! Look at it! It's ugly, isn't it?
And the only person that can do it is Polychrome. And then once he is like free, he's like so happy and he's like, aren't I handsome? And they're all just kind of like, I mean, kind of average, but okay. Once again, I would die on the spot. Once this whole adventure is over, all of them, minus Queen Anne and her army, end up getting teleported back to the Emerald City.
I forgot to mention that Quox the dragon does go back through the tube to get back to his home, and that Polychrome goes back to her father, the Rainbow.
And the Shaggy Man's brother, Betsy Bobbin, and Hank all decide to stay there permanently. And I feel like after this book, L Frank Baum kind of went into later seasons of Supernatural territory, where if you've watched Supernatural, then you know this. I'm gonna talk about it anyway because that's the kind of person that I am. Unfortunately, you can skip over this, but in Supernatural they used to do everything in their power to get the demon out of a person's body, and then after that they just kind of started killing everybody with that knife, regardless of whether the person was possessed or not and they wanted to live. It's kind of like that, where after this book, any character that just randomly shows up decides to stay there permanently. And I have to ask myself, what is your home life like? Because I get it, right? I would want to stay too. But a part of me would be like, well, what about my family? Is everyone worried about me? And so, like, is Betsy Bobbin just an orphan? Does she have absolutely no one taking care of her? Because
Somebody called me while I was recording the scene and it made the audio really weird, but it cut me off right when I was saying that the boat accident that Betsy was on that made her get washed up on the shores of Non-Estica ended up with the boat catching fire and sinking. So I don't know if it's that her entire family was on that boat and she has no other family, but she's taking this weirdly well if that's the case.
Was L Frank Baum just like, well, I wanted a new character, here she is? Because I feel like after this point forward, any other character just randomly shows up, and some of them I can get. But Betsy Bobbin, I do have to ask, like, did she just not have a family? And does any living relative, any caretaker think that she died in that storm? Much to think about. Anyway, Dorothy is obviously barely in this book. She shows up right at the end. But there's a trope within these books where at the end of the books, after all these adventures, all of the characters kind of congregate again at the Emerald City and they hang out and they talk. And I always think it's really cute because you get to see relationship dynamics play out already, even though they only get 5 minutes together when you're reading this book. And after this is established that Betsy Bobbin becomes one of Dorothy's core friends. So now Dorothy hangs out with her and with Ozma because obviously she's friends with all of these other characters like the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man and the Scarecrow, the Hungry Tiger, all that. But these are friends that are allegedly closer to her in age. I say allegedly because Ozma's a fairy and there's a lot of questions there. But this is like a very specific friend group. And to fix that plot hole of all of the other animal characters being able to speak once they get to Oz, it's revealed at the end of this book that Toto has always been able to speak. He just didn't want to. And you know what? I have to respect that. He really gained the ability to speak and said, no, I don't want to. Moving on to book 9, which is the Scarecrow of Oz, we get introduced to 2 more new characters. And like Betsy Bobbin and her mule Hank, they will be reoccurring characters later. And this is also a book where there's barely any Dorothy, and it's very much, what are these new characters doing and how do they interact with the world of Oz? The two new characters that are introduced are an old sailor with a peg leg named Captain Bill, and yes, I said Captain, C-A-P''N, and a little girl named Trot. Their relationship to each other is never really explained because you would assume that maybe he's her father or her grandfather, but she calls him Captain Bill, and so there seems to be that like formality there. So in my head, I'm just headcanon that it's very much the trope of the old gruff man who just happens to randomly adopt this little child that he found off the street or something. He's very fatherly towards her. It's very cute. It's just never really explained. So that's what I'm going with in my head. The two of them are in a rowboat off the coast of California when suddenly there's a whirlpool and it sucks them down. And they would have drowned had it not been for mermaids. And this is the first time that mermaids are ever actually mentioned in Oz, and that made me weirdly excited for some reason, because that means that all over the coast of the non-Estic Sea, there's mermaids. The mermaids don't really talk or do much else in this book, however, so don't get your hopes up. But they are like, I guess, water angels to them because they were going to drown, and they took them and placed them in what I assume is a magical underwater cave because they have oxygen in there. However, even though it's a miracle that they survived and they are now in this underwater cave with oxygen, they have no food outside of the food that Captain Bill just seems to have on his person, and he's giving most of it to Trot. And so they need to get out of this cave soon. But this is an Oz series book, and so obviously they're going to encounter other characters that are going to help them get out of there. And they meet this character that is called an orc. Not orc like the Lord of the Rings orc, but an orc, O-R-K. And this is a character that is like a weird bird kind of creature, but they have propellers. It's hard to describe. I'm going to put a picture here because I did not draw an orc. I was like, no, I don't think I can picture much else. And an orc is not a creature from Oz itself either. And he has been traveling because he lost his dimension. Not that the dimension is gone Spider-Verse style, but that he literally does not know how to make it back. The orc is also kind of lost in this cave too because it is dark and he can't see where he's going. But Captain Bill has a candle. So all three of them kind of help each other out to get out of the cave. And they end up just wandering until they can find an island so they can stop at, because the orc cannot carry the two of them for that long a distance without having to stop. I personally really enjoyed the general strangeness of the lands that they encounter in this book. The first island that they land on is this like strip of land that's covered in magic fruit that makes you shrink or grow. And there's only one guy on the island and he's kind of a jerk and they don't want to deal with him. So they eat berries that make them really small, and they put the ones that make them grow in their pocket, and they get inside Trot's little sunbonnet, and the orc can carry them from place to place in that bonnet. And the next place that they end up on is the Land of Mo, which is a land where everything is made out of sugar, molasses, and popcorn. And it is on the Land of Mo that they encounter Button Bright, who is lost again. And say what you want about Button Bright, he may not be the sharpest tool in the shed, and he may be easily distracted and lost all the time, but he doesn't stress. And I wish I was like that. Well, that's not true either. He does tend to cry. But he gets over it pretty quickly, so I like his resilience. With Button Bright tagging along, the orc takes them over the deadly desert and into the Land of Oz. And since there's like people there and civilization, he decides to leave because he really needs to find his dimension again, and so he leaves them there. However, the place that they are left on in Oz is a place named Jinxland, which is under the rule of King Cruel with a K. This kingdom is in the throes of political turmoil, and we're not gonna get too into that. However, just know that there is an evil king, a gardener, and a princess. Their whole thing is a little convoluted, and also there's a character who gets put underwater, but once again, remember that nobody dies, so I guess he's just down there. The king wants to marry off the princess, so he hires a witch to freeze her heart so that she'll stop being in love with the gardener and let him marry her off to a political ally. But this backfires because by freezing her heart, she doesn't have the capacity to feel love at all. She doesn't have empathy. She doesn't really care about anyone. She doesn't even care about herself. So instead of just not being in love with this one guy and allowing herself to be married off to this other guy, she doesn't want to get married, period. Pause. I thought, based on the fact that this witch character has an eye patch, that it was just the Wicked Witch back, but under a new name. But if that is the case, she needs to fire her PR team because her name is Blinky. None of the other characters really acknowledge if it is the same person, and so I'm just gonna assume it's a different witch entirely. Anyway, Glinda over in Oz finds out about everything that's happening because of her book of records. And so she sends the Scarecrow to go resolve this matter. I'm choosing to kind of skip over a lot of the stuff that happens in this book, but just know that there's a lot of commotion in the palace and there's a revolt. But in the end, the group uses magic to shrink the witch little by little until she undoes her spells. But she took too long and now she's too small and she lost her magic. And so the princess becomes the ruler of Jinxland, makes the gardener her consort, and then the rest of them go to the Emerald City. And once they're there, Captain Bill and Trot decide to stay permanently, and now they are in the Emerald City forever. Book 10 is Rinkitink and Oz, and this is another really odd one for lore and geography reasons, so stick with me here. Let me put my glasses on for this again. So, in the first book, Oz is a fairy pocket dimension, and it's got 4 quadrants, city in the middle, deadly desert surrounds them, that's it. Very easy for a fairy tale. Then we get the inclusion of way more kingdoms that are still technically a part of Oz. Usually they're literally like in the Munchkin Land or in Quadling Country. They just happen to have a specific leader, but that leader listens to Ozma. And then they have lands outside of Oz that surround the non-Estic Ocean. So think the Gnome Kingdom, the Land of Ev. And then there is the non-Estic Ocean itself. And there's also places like the underground world that shows up in book 4 that does get included in the maps as part of non-Estica, but that doesn't really make sense to me either, because that would mean that it's directly under California. And I'm starting to get confused about where everything is once you think about that, because if it's directly under California, that would mean that parts of non-Estica are underground, but they are surrounded by water, so I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, set all of that aside, because now in Rinkitink of Oz, there are 4 new islands. There is Pingaree, there is Gilgad, and then there is Regos and Corregos. And these are islands populated by regular, mortal human beings. However, there is magic, and they are aware of magic existing. They know about mermaids and they know about fairies, but they don't seem to know what other human beings are doing. I like to think of it as the closer you are to this fairy continent, even if you are like a regular human being, the more whimsical you are, the more, I guess, contaminated by fae magic that's kind of seeping through here. The main character of the 10th book is a little boy named Prince Inga. He is from the island of Pingaree, and the island of Pingaree is supposed to be this like super peaceful land because his father is like a benevolent king who has 3 magic pearls. A blue one that gives him superhuman strength, a pink one that protects him from harm, and a white one that whispers words of wisdom to him. And this is very helpful because the leaders of the islands of Regos and Corregos are a married evil king and queen who are warriors, and they like to conquer lands around them, which means that there are, once again, more islands outside of the 4 that we just learned about, but they are not mentioned. So Prince Inga's dad likes to keep the 3 pearls safely hidden somewhere on the island, and he tells his son exactly where it is, just in case there's ever an emergency, which is just foreshadowing for what is to come. One day, the island of Pingaree is visited by the king of Gilgad, so King Rinkitink, and he brings his very cranky talking goat, Bilbil. This man finds his job exhausting. He hates it. And I can't say that it's because he's an introvert, because he definitely loves talking and partying and hanging out. He just doesn't seem to like the responsibility of being king. But for some reason, his subjects are obsessed with him. They can't stand it when he takes a day off or when he goes to visit another land. They want him back immediately. Like as if there is an entire community gentle parenting this man, and they love doing it. Anyway, while they're celebrating, boom, they get invaded. And since the king didn't have the pearls on him, everyone in the island gets enslaved and they get captured by the king and queen of Regos and Korogos, except for Inga, Rinkitink, and Bilbil. Once Prince Inga is able to find the pearls, he puts them in his shoes and he takes Rinkitink on the boat with him. He's not very helpful, by the way. And so they row to the island of Regos. And side note, the island is named Regos because the king is Regos, I don't know. And the other island is Korogos because it's Queen Kor. With the pearls in his shoes, Prince Inga is now unstoppable. He's kind of like Superman. He can't be hurt and he's super strong. And so he makes the king and his army flee because they're so scared of him because he seems to have magic. And considering how they ran away from him, Inga thinks that with the pearls, he'll be able to very easily save his people and find his parents. However, they stay the night in Regos, and Rinkitink, who is incompetent, throws one of his shoes out the window to stop a noise because he wants to keep sleeping, and that means that they lose some of the pearls. The only pearl that Prince Inga still has is the Pearl of Wisdom. After the whole losing the pearl thing, a lot of the book is just sailing back and forth between the islands and them trying to find the pearl because it's a whole wild goose chase, because poor man found the shoe and decided to keep the shoe for himself, not knowing that the pearls were in there, and they have to get the pearls back. And then a little girl who is that man's daughter has the pearls with her, and they meet her in another place. It's a whole thing that we don't have to get into it. Just know that they get the pearls back. However, once Inga gets the pearls back and he's able to free his people, the story's not over, because King Ghost and Queen Kor have stolen his parents and they have taken them to the Gnome Kingdom. The king and queen want to make a deal with the Gnome King, and they want to leave Prince Inga's parents behind like prisoners in the Gnome Kingdom. And you would think that since the Gnome King is now Calico and not Ruggiero, that he would be a little bit more understanding. But no, because once Prince Inga figures out where his parents are and he goes to follow them and begs Calico to let his parents go, he refuses because he's now politically aligned with the king and queen and just tries to kill both Inga and Rinkitink and, Bilbil the goat in a series of maze-like booby traps. And it's specified in this book that because Inga and Rinkitink are mortal, that they can die in this series of traps, which leads me to ask, can Dorothy die in Oz? Because yes, L Frank Baum establishes that no one can die in Oz anymore. But in this book, it's established that mortals can die, at least in Non-Estica. So I have to ask the question, is it just like a 4 quadrants thing that no one can die in the 4 quadrants of Oz and therefore everyone is perfectly safe? Or does that only apply to the fairy people, the native people of Oz? And is Dorothy, Betsy, Trot, Captain Bill, are they all possibly in danger if anything were to happen to them? And let's just hope that Dorothy's little kiss on the forehead from the first book has like a lifetime guarantee if that's the case.
Because he's my best friend, he's my pal, he's my homeboy, my rotten soldier, he's my sweet cheese, my good time boy.
While Inga and Rinkitink and Bilbil are surviving the horrors, Dorothy is witnessing all of this as if it's juicy reality TV on Ozma's Magic Picture, and she is appalled, and so she wants to go save them. And of course he does, because I'm starting to think that the gnomes have like a general fear of Dorothy and Ozma. So Dorothy takes the 3 of them plus Inga's parents to Oz to see if Ozma and Glinda can help them. There, Glinda discovers that Bill the goat was actually somebody from Oz that was transformed into a goat, and that's why he has such a negative disposition. And so they free him from this spell, and he is now like a fairy prince man, and he chooses to stay in Oz. Inga, his parents, and Rinkitink all go back, and we never hear from them again, and that's the end of that book. Book 11 is The Lost Princess of Oz, and I'm just gonna speed right through this one. This book finally addresses my general issues with the whole Ozma and Glinda can just decide who can and can't study magic, but not in a way that's very critical of this decision. The book starts with Dorothy looking for Ozma in her bedroom and finding out that Ozma and her magic picture are missing. At the same time, Glinda realizes that her book of records and all of her other magical tools are also missing, and the wizard realizes that all of his stuff is also gone. So obviously Dorothy organizes a search party. While all this is happening, there's also a place that's technically in Winky Country, and it's like a little tiny village technically above everything, where there's other people who all listen to this very well-dressed talking frog. And there's a character named Kate the Cookie Cook. I think it's Kate. I always just said Cookie Cook and I didn't write it down in my notes. And she is freaking out because she can't find her magic dishpan. So this baker and this talking frog decide to, I guess, be an unlikely duo and go on a journey to try to find it. Because the frog is also kind of doing a wizard from the first book scenario where he's technically kind of a fraud. Because he's so well dressed and eloquent, everyone just assumes that he knows everything, and he doesn't bother to tell anyone that he doesn't. And so he goes on this journey with her to get this magic dishpan, but he really does not have a plan at all. Since they don't have magic, they have to walk all over Oz trying to find Ozma. And along the way, once again, this is the formula for these books, they find a lot of undiscovered lands. And as much as I love Dorothy, these kinds of plots can feel just a tad colonial, because a lot of the times they'll find these little kingdoms or countries where the rulers don't have any idea who Ozma even is, nor do they care. They have their own established rules and laws. And Dorothy is just always like, well, no, your queen is Queen Ozma. There's also a kingdom in this book where they have enslaved giants, and no one really does anything about this. I always thought that was weird, because I always thought that at the end of the book they would do something to free them. They don't. They just kind of move on from that very quickly. And I guess I can understand their apprehension, because giants are usually villains in these stories, but still, it felt kind of weird. My personal favorite kingdom that they find is a kingdom where everyone is a little tiny teddy bear. And the king of that kingdom decides to help them with their quest. And he brings with them a smaller pink teddy bear who has this like magic power to find things. Oh, and Button Bright, he's back in this one, by the way. At the end of the book, the mystery of where Ozma is that she was trapped inside a peach pit by the villain of the book, which is this guy named Ugu the Shoemaker. He used to be a shoemaker, now he's, I guess, a wizard, but that's illegal. And he has stolen all of the magical items in all of Oz because he's upset by Glinda and Ozma's whole nobody else can study magic decree. And honestly, that seems fair, but he also wants to be the only person that studies magic too, and he wants to take over Oz. In the end, Ugu the Shoemaker is defeated because Dorothy, using her magic belt, turns him into a dove. And once he's a dove, he feels at peace and he doesn't want to be a bad guy again, so he stays as a dove. And again, why does Dorothy get to use the magic belt? Because this feels like favoritism, because they won't let the cookie cook keep her dishpan. Book 12 is the Tin Woodman of Oz, and I actually really like this one because there are some Frankenstein elements to it, but we'll get to that. One thing that I haven't really touched on, because I've been trying to give you like a really fast synopsis of all of the books, is that the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow are best friends. They are always together. If you go visit the Tin Man, there's an 80% chance that the Scarecrow is already in his palace. Because the Scarecrow's got two hands, one for the Tin Man and one for Scraps. And I'm not saying that this is canon, but that's how I'm reading it. What I'm saying is that it's basically an asexual throuple, but only really because they're sharing the Scarecrow with each other. Book 12 starts with the Tin Man and the Scarecrow hanging out in his palace when suddenly this random guy shows up. His name is Woot the Wanderer, and I think his name kind of tells you enough. He likes to wander. And when he goes into the palace, he starts talking with the Tin Man, and the Tin Man starts talking about his backstory. And I kind of touched on this when I was talking about the first Wizard of Oz book, but this one is very specific to the Tin Man's backstory. Tin Woodsman, I should keep saying in this one, but you'll understand what I mean by that. But anyway, this one is specifically about him, so we're gonna get more into detail about it. The Tin Woodsman used to be a regular Munchkin man named Nick Chopper. He had his own life. He was engaged to a woman named Nimmy Ammy, and Nimmy Ammy was the servant to the Wicked Witch of the East. Now, the Wicked Witch of the East does not want to let her servant go. So when she finds out that the Tin Woodsman wants to marry her and presumably leave to live together, she is enraged and she enchants his axe. Whenever the Tin Woodsman would try to use his axe, because chopping wood is literally his job, a limb would get sliced off, and then he would go to the tinsmith in town and get a tin prosthetic. Eventually, his whole body was made of tin, and he stopped being in love with Nimmy Ammy. He thinks because once he was entirely made of tin, he lost his ability to love. And I have my own thoughts on this. I always think that it's really interesting that the Tin Man places so much value on the concept of romantic love. Put a pin in that. After realizing that he's no longer in love with Nimmy Ammy and that he is now essentially entirely made out of tin, which I assume is probably the bigger issue here, he leaves her and goes to work in the forest one day. It rains, he gets rusted, he's stuck there for like a year. When Dorothy oils his body and gets him to move again, he kind of feels like Dorothy has given him an entirely new life. So it's essentially pre-Dorothy and after Dorothy. And after he tells this whole story, Woot the Wanderer, in what I think is kind of a dick move, tells him that his new heart must not actually work. Because if he genuinely had a truly loving and kind heart, he would have found Nimmy Ammy a while ago and made her his wife. And so now the Tin Man is kind of freaking out because he thinks that Woot the Wanderer is right. If he truly was a kind and loving person, he would have found Nimmy Ammy again and apologized for essentially just leaving her and would have married her even though he does not romantically love her. And I take issue with that. Because throughout the books, a big thing with the Tin Man's character, even if sometimes it is a little bit contradictory, is that he genuinely cares about people. Does he experience romantic love? No. But he cares about people, and he tries really hard to have empathy and kindness. So I think that kind of goes back to why I get bothered by the fact that they never really seem to care that what they were given in the first book were placebos. I feel like along the way, they should have been able to discover that within themselves, they already had these qualities. Because the Tin Man has never been unkind. And this makes the Tin Man feel so bad that he decides to embark on a quest to go find his ex-fiancée. And obviously, he takes the Scarecrow and Woot the Wanderer with him. On the way to the Munchkin Land, however, they do hit a snag because they get trapped by a giant woman who is actually a Yukuhu. And this is technically a new thing because a Yukuhu is supposed to be an ancient magic species, far more ancient than the fairy people of Oz. They're very powerful, and they don't necessarily all look the same because there will be other Yukuhus in other books, and they're not all giant women. There are other giants in the Oz books. One of them is this Yukuhu's husband. I assume he is not a Yukuhu. It's never said that he is. He is just a regular giant. And he is introduced in the same book where we're introduced to Oho the Unlucky, except he is imprisoned for his cannibalism crimes. And she does not seem to be in any rush to go help him get out of there. I think she's fine. She has another captive. It's not just the three of them. She has also captured Polychrome. She's lost again. And this time, she has been transformed into a little canary bird in a cage. The Yukuhu also transforms the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and Woot the Wanderer. The Scarecrow gets turned into a stuffed bear, the Tin Man gets turned into a tin owl, and Woot the Wanderer gets turned into a green monkey. The three of them and Polychrome are able to trick the giant and escape, but they're kind of stuck in these forms until they meet up with Ozma. She's able to turn all of them back, and Polychrome goes back home, but the rest of them still want to go find Nimmy Ammy, so they continue their quest. They finally make it to Munchkin Land, and this is where the Tin Man discovers something that I think is so fun. He is not the only Tin Man. I should keep calling him the Tin Woodsman, and I'm going to have to, because if not, it's going to get very confusing. It turns out that when the Tin Man broke up with Nimmy Ammy and then got rusted and essentially went missing because nobody knew where he was, obviously, or they would have unstuck him before Dorothy, a new guy shows up in town and he wants to court Nimmy Ammy, and he is a soldier. So this is the Tin Soldier. And the Wicked Witch of the East basically did the exact same thing to him. Whenever he would try to use his sword, he would get a limb sliced off. He would go to the tinsmith and he would get a tin prosthetic. By the time he was entirely made of tin, he also just didn't love Nimmy Ammy anymore, breaks up with her, gets stuck. And that's how the Tin Woodsman finds the Tin Soldier. Now that the both of them have met, there's kind of an issue, because now the both of them want to go marry Nimmy Ammy. Not because they love her romantically, but because they think that it's the gentlemanly thing to do. So they decide to go ask the only mutual acquaintance that they can think of, and that is the tinsmith that gave them their body parts. And so here's where we get to a plot twist. It turns out that because no one in Oz can die, and once you chop somebody in half, they're still alive. It's a whole thing. The Tin Men have essentially Ship of Theseus'd their bodies. It turns out that those pieces of you are still alive, but I guess your essence is what you currently have inside your tin body. And Nimmy Ammy has been perfectly happy this entire time because she is currently married to a man that is made out of the Tin Woodsman and the Tin Soldier's body parts. And I just kind of love how creepy and insane that kind of is, to make a Frankenstein creature out of other people's limbs when they have gone missing and you don't know where they are. That's wild. Who gave the tinsmith any idea that he has the qualifications to make a new person without the consent of the people whose limbs they are? And I guess technically you could make two people out of those limbs because you have equal amount of body parts from both the Tin Woodsman and the Tin Soldier, and you used half of them to make a new person. I guess you could make another one. We also get some new lore in this book. Hold on. This book makes it canon that Ozma's mother is the queen of all fairies, Queen Lorene. And Queen Lorene is allegedly the reason why everything in this pocket dimension is the way that it is. Because this used to be regular non-fairy magic land in our world, except the Deadly Desert still existed. So the Deadly Desert was around it and no one could ever cross. And Queen Lorene put a spell over everything, and now it's like wild fairy country. But why did the Deadly Desert already exist? And this does not really explain the inconsistencies of the Land of Ev and other places in Non-Estica, because I assume that they too also already existed like the Deadly Desert, and it's just Oz that's like this because of her and the whole people can't die thing. And also, where is she? Where is she? Where are Ozma's parents? Book 13 is called The Magic in Oz, aka more consequences to the whole no magic allowed thing. So let's set the scene. In Oz, there is a mountain peak, and up on that mountain peak is this whole community of people that live high up. I am pretty sure they're literally just called the high ups, but I didn't write this down in my notes. And in that community is this guy named Kiki Aru. And Kiki, because I'm going to keep calling him Kiki instead of saying his whole name, he is really resentful of the whole only Glinda and the wizard can practice magic in Oz thing, because his father is the inventor of a very special magic word. And I can't repeat this magic word, so don't expect me to even try, not because it's a bad word or anything, but because it's literally like the password that comes with your internet modem. I'm just gonna put it here, so I guess try to imagine what that sounds like. Everyone in Kiki's family is super loyal to Ozma, and so they all kind of quit using that word cold turkey, and they're perfectly okay with never having magic again. And Kiki's father had originally written down the magic word on a piece of paper and just hidden it once he found out that he is not allowed to use it anymore, and he was perfectly content with that. Kiki, on the other hand, finds the word, learns how to pronounce it, and runs away. He uses the word to transform himself into a bird, flies over the deadly desert, and ends up in the land of Oz. And quick side note, capitalism does exist in the land of Oz, and I assume in the Gnome Kingdom, because when he gets there, he cannot get a room in like an inn because he needs money. And of course, living in Oz, he didn't have money or apparently know about the existence of money either, and so now he's kind of at a loss. But he resolves this very quickly by stealing and lying. It is there that he meets up with the former Gnome King Rugedo, and I would like to keep calling him the Gnome King, but once again, Calico is now the Gnome King, so from now on I'm gonna have to use his name. So Rugedo. I'm not gonna look it up. The two of them form an alliance, but really they both kind of can't stand each other and are both eagerly waiting for the time in which they can backstab each other. Because all Rugedo really wants to do is learn the magic word, because now that he doesn't have magic anymore, he can't get revenge on the people of Oz. So he convinces Kiki to also transform him into a bird so that they can fly into Oz and just reap havoc. Once they fly back, they decide to disguise themselves as something else so they can infiltrate the animals in the forest. But for some reason, instead of just turning themselves into an animal that already exists, they decide to invent one, and they become Lion-Eags. Lion-Eags? Lion, monkey, eagle. A lion, monkey, eagle. Lion, monkey, eagles. Plural, because there's two of them.
Do you have any idea how long it took for me to infiltrate this group? 25 minutes.
So, you remember how the lion technically became king of the forest in the first book? Well, the lion kind of says in the third one that he doesn't think that he's actually all that brave. That the potion does work, but that at his core, he will always be scared. And so he's technically a very respected person, but he's not like king of the forest. They have a political structure that kind of reminds me of the Senate in Star Wars. So there's multiple representatives. One of them is a unicorn, by the way. Love that. So Rugedo and Kiki, two awful names. I hate having to say them every single time because I keep struggling and I have to start over. They try to convince the animals that Ozma is going to surprise attack them. And the plan is that they want to turn all of the animals in the forest into human beings so they can form an army and attack Oz and essentially conquer Oz for them. Why they can't do this in their animal bodies, I don't know. While all of this is happening, Dorothy is peacefully unaware in Oz because she has other things to worry about. And that's Ozma's birthday party. Dorothy decides to team up with the wizard in terms of getting her a birthday present because she wants to make this huge cake for Ozma, and she wants monkeys to pop out of the cake and do a little dance for her. And she can't do that on her own. She needs the wizard to magically shrink the monkeys and put them in the cake, and also to teach them how to dance. I don't know, maybe he's a choreographer. The lion is also not currently in the forest while all of this is happening. He's actually in Emerald City with the rest of the gang, and he decides to go help Dorothy and the wizard by going into the forest with them. And they're not the only people trying to find a present for Ozma in this book. There's also a third subplot of Captain Bill, Trot, and the Glass Cat on the hunt for this magic flower. And this adventure is actually way more dangerous than anything else that's happening in the book because this flower only grows on one enchanted island. And if you touch the island, you start to grow roots from under your feet and you merge and become one with the island. The longer they're stuck, the more they become one with the island, and they send the Glass Cat to go get help. So they're fine. I guess. Back to the main plot, the whole magic word thing is just causing chaos all through the forest, including what I think is very cute. Dorothy gets turned into a little lamb, and the lion gets turned into a human being. And a bunch of other stuff happens. They make the monkeys super huge, they turn other animals into human beings. It's a whole thing. Eventually the wizard is able to learn how to say the word himself, and so he turns everyone back to normal, except for Rugedo and Kiki. He turns them into walnuts. They also save Captain Bill and Trot, I told you they'd be fine, and they go back to the Emerald City just in time for Ozma's big birthday bash. And after they celebrate, the wizard remembers that he still has the walnuts in his pocket, and so he transforms them back into their regular selves, but they make them drink from the Fountain of Oblivion again. And once they're like mind wiped, everyone's like really excited because I guess this is like a fresh new start, and they can just start to teach Rugedo how to be nice. Lobotomy. The last book written by L Frank Baum is the 14th book, Glinda of Oz. And this is another one where Ozma gets involved in political affairs because anytime there's a kingdom within Oz that doesn't really follow her laws, Glinda sees it in her book of records and they have to intervene. In this book, there are two new groups of people. There's the Skeezers and there's the Flatheads. The Flatheads are this race of people that literally have flat heads. They don't have a brain in there. Instead, they have a can with their brains that they have to carry around in order to actually function. However, there's a lot of corruption here, and you can just steal someone else's brains and leave them literally brainless while you have 2 or even 3 or 4 brains. The Skeezers are kind of just regular people, except they live in an underwater glass dome. The leaders of both groups are just generally evil people, and they are determined to go to war because the queen of the Skeezers turned the queen of the Flatheads into a golden pig. Which means, bingo, they have illegal magic. Once Ozma and Dorothy get there, they meet up with the queen of the Skeezers and they go into the glass dome. However, the queen is the only one that knows how to raise the dome from underwater. And the queen is not like a fairy or like a witch necessarily. She learned how to use magic because there are 3 characters named the Adepts. These are 3 presumably ancient witches who are adept in all things magic. The Adepts taught the queen how to use magic, and then she betrayed them by turning them into 3 metallic colored fish, and now they're just kind of stuck in that body of water. No one has seen them since. Once the war is about to start between the Skeezers and the Flatheads, Dorothy and Ozma are stuck in the dome. And when the queen is going to talk to the leader of the Flatheads, she gets turned into a beautiful swan. And once she gets turned into a swan, she no longer really cares about even having a kingdom. She's very vain, she loves being a swan, and she's just kind of over it. But that means that she will not help them lift the dome back up, and Ozma and Dorothy are trapped underwater. Ozma has some magic. If not, she wouldn't have been able to help the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, Polychrome, and Woot the Wanderer in that last book. However, she doesn't have enough magic to save them. So she calls Glinda using this magic ring that she has that is kind of like an alert system. So Glinda, realizing that they're in danger, decides to go find them and takes some of Dorothy's friends with her on this quest. Now, you remember the 3 Adepts that I mentioned? They got turned into fish, specifically a bronze fish, a golden fish, and a silver fish. They, like all the other animals in Oz, still have the ability to talk. And so, while all this is happening, they speak to a Skeezer boy, and he puts them in like a little bucket. They convince him to help them, and so he takes the bucket to a woman named Red Rira, and she is a Yukuhu. She lives alone with all of her pets, so kind of like Circe from Greek mythology, except she loves to transform herself. At one point she is a gorilla, at another point she is a beautiful woman. She's definitely kind of menacing and not to be trusted, but she's not really the main villain in this book at all, and the boy is able to convince her to transform the fish back into their original bodies. Once Glinda is able to arrive with her little search party, her and the 3 Adepts are able to use their combined magic to raise the dome again. Glinda and Ozma give the title of Prime Minister to the boy that helped the 3 Adepts, so now he is in charge of all of the Skeezers. They also change the Flatheads. They make it so they have regular heads and their brains are in there, and now they accept the Adepts as their rulers. And that's where the original 14 books end. But after this, L Frank Baum passes away. And so the only other book left in this box set is the Royal Book of Oz. And I am choosing not to do a synopsis of the Royal Book of Oz. One, because it wasn't written by the original author. Two, because I hated it. I'm going to give my final thoughts in a second, so know that this doesn't exist in a vacuum. However, the final book that I read is so jarringly racist that I'm choosing not to really talk about it. And obviously, like I said before, there are 40 books, so there's way more content to read through. I don't think I personally am going to be doing that, but just know that the 15th book is essentially about the Scarecrow feeling like he doesn't have a family. There's a few new added characters, but overall I think that Ruth Plummy Thompson just does not have the charm that maybe L Frank Baum did. I have my critiques of L Frank Baum that I will be talking about in a second. However, I do think that the writing style is pretty different and I just didn't care for it, so I'm not going to talk about it in this video. And I just can't stress how bad the 15th book was for me to read. I'm one of those people that once I start a series, I have to finish it unless it's really, really bad the first time around. It's just how my brain operates. I literally cannot stop because I need to know that the whole thing is bad. I need to know that I gave it my best shot and I still hate it. And the 15th book is very much that. Let's pretend it doesn't exist, okay? There is so much that I didn't get to include in this video just because I thought that it would be way too long, and considering this video is already insanely long as it is, despite me trying to make it as brief as possible without skipping over some major plot points, I apologize in advance if you are like a die-hard Oz fan and I skipped over something that you really enjoyed, or I oversimplified a lot, or I didn't bring up your favorite writer character, or if I complained too much about the retcons or continuity errors. It's all in good fun. I know how much it sucks when you're really, really, really into something and then you finally watch a video essay about it and it lacks nuance and it oversimplifies way too much and it trashes your favorite character. I know, but I tried my best. There's 14 of these books. And despite the inconsistencies and the critiques that I still do have and I will talk about right now, I still genuinely enjoyed myself. I wouldn't have read 15 books plus Wicked and then watched all these other adaptations if I didn't enjoy the world of Oz. I like children's fantasy in general, despite the issues that I may have with some of it. And, you know, if you have any other recommendations for children's fantasy, please let me know. As an illustrator, I'd love any excuse to read any more children's fantasy so that I can have stuff to put in my portfolio. If you have any recommendations, please tell me in the comments. But back to Oz. As with all literature, there is plenty to analyze and plenty to critique. So without further ado, here are my final thoughts on the Wizard of Oz series, starting with female representation. From the beginning, it is very clear that L Frank Baum wanted to make a female-centric storyline, which I do appreciate. Baum was a staunch supporter of the women's suffrage movement, and that becomes very clear when you think about the fact that the main character for most of the books is a little girl going through her own hero's journey. And Dorothy Gale as a character is very important to me. She's kind, she's resourceful, she's curious, and she's loyal. She's one of those characters that makes the world brighter just by being herself. Almost everyone that she meets on her journey instantly loves her because of her good old Kansas charm and determination. I personally love that she is a deeply loyal friend who aggressively cares about the people that she loves. She will literally punch a lion in the nose to protect her little dog and then comfort that lion when that lion starts crying. And it's not like those stories where she just happens to be the only important female character. Many of the most powerful figures in Oz society are women. Ozma, Glinda, the witches, fairies like Polychrome, most political leaders, and many more are female characters. And then you have characters like Betsy Bobbin and Trot, which are little girls just like Dorothy, who just as easily manage to fit in and tag along with all these adventures. As far as I remember, no one ever brings up these characters' gender as a negative either. It's unfortunately very common for little girl characters like Dorothy to be treated as the exception. They're not like other girls. They're special. Dorothy is just like other girls, and all the other girls love her. And this very progressive treatment of the female characters just makes it the more disappointing and frustrating when I found out Baum's views on race. Race in the Oz books is barely ever mentioned, but it's a very good example of how intersectionality in art matters. L Frank Baum attempted to use the Oz series to make uniquely American fairy tales, in the vein of what the Brothers Grimm had done in Europe, allegedly without the heavy-handedness of a moral teaching and the violence, but that's clearly something that he thought of later, but that's not what this section is about. And I do think that if most people read the books the way that I did, with no prior knowledge of Baum as a person or his other work, and no illustrations to really cloud the way that you see these characters, you really wouldn't think anything is all that fishy. A lot of these more human characters don't have a physical description outside of maybe hair color, so it's really up to the reader. Dorothy herself has absolutely no physical description outside of the fact that she is a little girl, so you can really interpret that however you want. And any dialogue used to show off an accent is more to show off the regional differences between all these characters than to mock them. Unlike the 15th book, which was insane. But I'm not the kind of person that can just shut off my brain when reading. I analyze, I overanalyze, I discuss with people who have never read the book, and I just talk at. And especially if it's a book series as old as this, you tend to have to keep your eyes open. It's unfortunately a critical thinking skill that you learn as a person of color who's really into classic books. Some of the things that definitely made me raise an eyebrow or two were the treatment of certain non-human characters, or the way that the politics work in Oz. A lot of the things that I am critiquing in this book were not overt, and I wouldn't judge anyone who read these casually like I did and didn't see anything weird. And obviously, most fairy tales have some kind of monarchy, but it is a bit odd to praise Oz as this utopian society that's so much better than the real world, when Glinda is out here reporting any and all who break a simple rule to Ozma like she's some kind of glamorous Grand Vizier. Reading the Wizard of Oz books can feel very refreshing because the bar is in hell and you're not reading slurs every other page. Though, unfortunately, in one of the earlier books, I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, there is a slur so old-timey that I thought it was a made-up word. Once I finished the series and looked it up, because I had kind of a gut feeling, it was definitely a delayed punch in the gut, but thankfully it's never brought up again. It was through this research that I found out about Baum's treatment of Native Americans, so trigger warning in advance for this section, it's gonna get a little racist. More like a lot racist. In the 1890s, after the Wounded Knee Massacre, Baum published an article in which he said that the annihilation of Native Americans was necessary to protect the white settlers. And big surprise, the guy who wants to make uniquely American fairy tales is anti-indigenous. Who would have thought? Finding that out definitely says a lot about the way in which the Oz books are written. Baum seemed to have changed his views over time according to sources about his non-Oz related work, but seeing as I have not read those, I'm not going to comment. But I also don't really care about whether or not he changed his mind, because that entire article was deeply unsettling and very violent. And knowing this after reading the entire 14-book series, it's obvious that Oz seems to have a colonial mindset that definitely conflicted with the whole Oz is a utopia thing. Ozma immediately becomes the ruler of all Oz, even in the regions where nobody knows who she is. Another example of this are the characters who used to be able to practice magic. If they feel any kind of resentment on losing that magic, they're immediately villainized, whereas characters like the wizard, random white American guy who descended from the heavens and took over an entire city, is just forgiven. He gets the easiest redemption arc in the world, whereas other minor characters who maybe disagreed with Ozma are kind of worn down by the end of the book into just embracing her as their true leader. And I wholeheartedly believe that a person's political views can and will attach themselves to the fictional works that they create, even if they think that they are writing something completely unbiased. So, while Baum seemingly wanted to create a feminist utopia where everyone is happy and free, it's definitely giving white feminist, and it colors the story that, were I less observant, would have felt really inclusive. It does, however, tickle me that as a modern viewer, I was probably imagining the world that he created as way more diverse than he actually intended. But I don't want to end this video on a negative note. Despite all of those very valid critiques, I still enjoyed reading the books. I used to love reading as a child. I used to devour books. I used to be able to read 7 to 9 books on one single vacation. It was my thing. But as I got older, I read less and less because life got in the way. last year I only read 10 books, which at the time was a high point. My only reading goal this year was to read at least one more book than what I did last year, and giving myself the challenge to read through the Oz series has definitely helped me get back into the habit of reading. And as of filming this right now, I'm on book 22 of the year, which is definitely not high to all those like book talk people who read 15 books a month, but for me, I'm really excited. I'm really happy with myself. It also led me to seeking out more adaptations of that book that were way more diverse. Obviously, we have The Wiz, and when I went to go see The Wiz, I was working as a muralist in an Afro-Caribbean cultural center, and we all went together as like a field trip, and I got to see these black and brown kids' eyes light up as they saw characters like Dorothy and Glinda as black women, and they were so excited. And you also have books like Wicked that use the pre-established lore of those 14 books. I definitely recommend that you read those 14 books if you're really into the book Wicked, because there's so much just put into that from somebody who clearly knows the lore of the original series. And he uses that to critique the government and institutional racism and religious fanaticism. The queer community has also definitely embraced several characters from the Oz series. Dorothy, her trio of friends, Glinda, Ozma. And Baum's choice to omit romance from the original books has definitely strengthened some of those queer interpretations. And with Judy Garland being a staunch supporter of gay rights, Dorothy as a character will forever be tied to the LGBTQ+ community and Judy Garland's legacy. Looking back at all the adaptations that I grew up watching while scripting this video, I do think it's fun that I got not one, but 2 lesbian Dorothys on trashy YA fantasy TV. Queer coding in the Oz books may or may not have been intentional. I can't put words in Baum's mouth. However, through a modern lens, there's a lot to work with. I talked about Ozma earlier and how the trans community has definitely embraced her as a symbol of transness. And I've seen that a lot of people interpret her relationship with Dorothy as a very innocent childhood romance.
But I'm a little more equal, right? I'm your BFF.
On top of that, we have a character like the Tin Man who struggles with even the concept of romantic love and feeling less than because he can't feel it.
Wherefore art thou, Romeo?
Meanwhile, his relationship with the Scarecrow is deeply close and very intimate. I would argue that most of the male friendships in this book are deeply close and very intimate. They're not afraid to share their feelings in a non-toxic masculine way. And with adaptations like Wicked and Wicked the Musical, characters like Glinda and the Wicked Witch have kind of retroactively become sapphic icons. While I grew up listening to the Wicked soundtrack, I never actually really sat down to watch the musical, and I know that the book series is very different, but I certainly interpreted Glinda as a lesbian. In 2014, we now have plays, cartoons, movies, TV shows, anime. We can claim the parts of Oz that we really love and leave the parts that we don't. I'm still not an expert on the subject, and there's still so many adaptations I have yet to see. So I recommend, if this is something that you're still really interested in, to also check out people like the Oz Vlog on TikTok. She knows way more than I ever will about Oz. I'm just the crazy person that decided to read an entire box set and then tell you about it for like 3 hours. And if you're interested in the history of the 1939 movie specifically, there's a lot of misinformation out there, so I also recommend Kaz Rowe's video. So yeah, I suck at outros. Most of my art videos just kind of include a thank you for watching at the end, and I never even ask people to subscribe or like it, but please do, because this was kind of an intimate rant and I put way too much time into it. Thank you if you made it this far. I know that this was a lot of information in one video, so if you stuck around for that, thank you, thank you, thank you. And please let me know if this is something you actually enjoyed. I enjoyed making it. I definitely wasted too much time on making it because I don't know if anyone's actually going to even see this video, but I really like ranting about things. I tend to do it to my poor sweet friend when she wants to go to sleep, and you know, I might as well tell it to an audience who maybe cares about what I'm talking about. So if this is something that you're actually interested in, in, please let me know. And if you're more interested in actual art videos, also let me know, and maybe check out the other videos that I have on this channel. I have way more respect for people who do video essays weekly now. And yeah, I don't have anything else to say, so I don't know. Maybe comment what your favorite adaptation of Oz is, or tell me if you're going to go see the Wicked movie, if you're excited to go see the Wicked movie, if you already have judgments on the Wicked movie based on the trailer alone. Please tell me, because I do. Bye!